Chapter 708. Her footsteps paused, but she recovered in an instant and continued to lead, Wooming forward. Yes, I am indeed Pharaoh Nitornis. May I know how you know who I am, my lord? Nitornis appeared to be slightly surprised. After all, she had never introduced herself before. I met Tachika, and she told me of your existence. Wooming noticed Nidikal's pause, but he didn't say much. Instead, he directly told her how he knew Nidikal's identity. The master of Chaldea, Nidikal said lightly, but it seemed that she didn't mean what she said. Wooming could see that Nidikals obviously knew Gadatsi, but for some reason, she seemed to have some concerns. It was probably because of her position. Ramses II did drive Gadatsi and the others out of the desert, but this didn't mean that Ramses II treated Gadatsi and the others as enemies. In Wooming's view, Ramses II's various actions showed that he didn't treat Gadatsi and the others who belonged to Chaldea as enemies at all. If Ramses II treated Gadatsi and the others as enemies, Gadatsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci probably wouldn't be able to leave the desert. Wooming didn't have the slightest doubt. He believed that Ramses II definitely had the ability to do so. Although Ramses II didn't seem to have much hostility toward Gadatsi and the others, that was only a hidden phenomenon. On the surface, Ramses II, who punished Gadatsi and the others and drove Gadatsi and the others out of the desert, was hostile toward Gadatsi and the others. That was what Nidikals thought as well. From the conversation with Nidikals, Wooming could see that Nidikals respected Ramses II very much. Although it didn't reach the state of crazy reverence, Wooming still saw the look of a die-hard fan in Nidikals' eyes. Also, Nitakris didn't seem to have a very high IQ. After all, in the eyes of a slightly smarter person, Ramses II's actions were obvious. His various actions all showed that he let go Gadatsi and the others of Chaldea and the others. Gadatsi told Wooming that Ramses II punished them for disrespecting him, and Gadatsi and the others passed this trial called punishment but actually test. But this was different in Nidikals' eyes. The king was angry, Chaldea and the others weren't punished, so the king drove Chaldea and the others away. This was Nidikals' point of view. Therefore, to Nidikals, who was a die-hard fan of Ramses II, Gadatsi was now an enemy. However, Nidikals had a good impression of Gadatsi and the others, and she didn't want to treat Gadatsi and the others as enemies. However, the issue of standpoint forced Nidikals to choose to stand against Gadatsi. Therefore, Nidikals was a little worried. This level of concern couldn't be eliminated in an instant, and Wooming knew this very well. But it shouldn't be a problem to pass a message. Even if Ramses II heard it, he probably wouldn't use this as an excuse to punish Nidikals. After all, he was a king pharaoh. It was too degrading for him to be so narrow-minded. Tachika told me, if you see Miss Nidikals, please thank her for me. Sigh. Wooming's words stunned Nidikals, and she stopped in her tracks. Wooming wasn't lying. Before Gadatsi left, she told Wooming to thank Nidikals when he saw her. Wooming didn't stop and continued. She said she was grateful that you brought them to find the supplies, and that you brought them to meet Ramses II. She was even more grateful that you sent them away. I don't have the right to be thanked by Miss Tachika. Standing in front of Wooming with her back, facing Wooming, Nidikals shook her head silently. I brought them here to get the supplies because Miss Tachika and the others saved me when I was kidnapped. I brought them to meet Lord Osmentis because Lord Osmentis requested it. I sent them away from the desert because they passed Lord Osmentis' test, and I only sent them for a short distance. From Nidikals' perspective, she brought Gadatsi and the others here just to return the favor, but her return of the favor put Gadatsi and the others in some danger. Fortunately, Gadatsi passed Ramses II's test, or else Nidikals would be condemned in her heart. However, Wooming didn't know what Nidikals was thinking, and he was slightly surprised. Nidikals' analysis was clear and logical, which made Wooming see Nidikals in a new light. This guy's IQ isn't low. Nidikals suddenly stopped, turned around, and stared straight into Wooming's eyes with narrowed eyes. I feel like you're thinking of something rude, Lord. Why would I? Wuming shook his head calmly. He had to be thick-skinned. All in all, I'm very grateful for your help to Tachika. Thank you. Wuming's words were full of sincerity, which made Nidicles a little confused. It's nothing. Nidicles shook her head again. Let's go. We're about to reach Lord Osmintis' throne, Nidicles said as she started walking. Wuming followed. You seem to respect Ramses II a lot. Wuming asked casually. Of course, because Lord Osmintis is the king of kings, the pharaoh of pharaohs. He's the role model for pharaohs like me who haven't reached the kingdom of heaven. Nidicles became excited when talking about Ramses II. The kingdom of eternity? Wuming crossed his arms as he pondered. It seemed that in ancient Egypt, pharaohs were the incarnations of gods, and there was a saying that went like this. After the pharaohs died, they would ascend to the kingdom of eternity and return to the god's side. For Nidicles, who had become a heroic spirit, this meant that she had not returned to the kingdom of eternity. Although Ramses II had also become a heroic spirit, his ability seemed to be much stronger than Nidicles. Perhaps it was because of this that Nidicles had the feeling that Ramses II had entered the kingdom of heaven, and that she was inferior to Ramses II. Really, you're not weak either. Wuming, who was behind Nidicles, smiled helplessly. Did you say something? Nidicles stopped and looked at Wuming. No, nothing. I was just talking to myself. Since there's nothing else, I should take my leave, Nidicles said. Nidicles pointed at the door in front of them, then spoke. We're here. Chapter 709. Wuming looked in the direction Nitocris was pointing at. It was the end of the corridor, and there was a simple earthen yellow stone door carved with decorative patterns. Without a doubt, behind the stone door was where Ramses II was. I'll take my leave first, sir. Lord Osmanthus is waiting for you inside, Nidicles said and turned to leave. Wait a minute, Pharaoh Nidicles. Wuming stopped her. Is there anything else you need? Nitoris looked at Wuming, who had stopped her with a puzzled expression. Didn't Ramses II tell you my name? Why do you keep addressing me as sir? After all, if it was Ramses II, he should be aware of Wuming's identity. And as someone sent by Ramses II to entertain Wuming, Nidicles should know Wuming's name. That would be too rude to Wuming, who is a guest. No, Lord Osmanthus told me your name. The most mysterious legendary knight under King Arthur's command, Britain's silver dragon, Vilo Sirenthod. This time, it was Wuming who was stunned. Since Nidicles knew his identity, why didn't she address Wuming by that name, but instead used the vague title of Sir to address Wuming? Although this body is the body of a sinner who has yet to enter the kingdom of eternity, this body also has some abilities because of the name of Pharaoh, Nidicles explained. Although Lord Osmanthus told me that your identity is a Knight of the Round Table, this body can still see that your true identity is not so. Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh was half-pushed, she still obtained divinity, the son of the sky god Horus, and his incarnation. Immediately after, Nidicles suddenly became respectful. Just like Lord Osmanthus is the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although I can't see your true body clearly, I still see some clues. You are a great person. Immediately after, Nidicles revealed an embarrassed look. Because I can see that your identity is not as simple as a Knight of the Round Table, I can no longer address you as Vilo Sirenthod. Similarly, because I can't see what your true identity is, I can only address you as a vague title like Sir. After Nidicles' explanation, Wuming felt relieved. Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh wasn't as legitimate as other pharaoh, she was still the incarnation of a god. It was normal for her to be able to see some clues about Wuming's identity. But in this case, didn't Ramses II was a pharaoh was a pharaoh Sirenthod? Pharaoh Sirenthod. But he didn't tell Pharaoh Sirenthod Saranthos, however. Ramses II didn't tell her about the origin dragon. Although she didn't know why, it wasn't important anymore. Because Wuming was about to meet Ramses II, it was better to ask all his questions face to face. As for Nidicles, it's a little perfunctory to call a refugee without a name. Just call me Vilo. After all, I'm just a knight now, Wu Ming replied. Since Ramses II didn't tell his subordinates about Wu Ming's secret, then Wu Ming wouldn't take his place. Yes, Sir Villo. Since I've brought you here, I'll take my leave now, Nitornis said before she walked into the dimly lit corridor behind her. Meeting is fate. Let me give you an evaluation. Upon hearing Wu Ming's words, Nitornis stopped in her tracks again. Not entering the kingdom of eternity doesn't mean that you're unqualified as a pharaoh. In my opinion, even a pharaoh who was raised to the position of a pharaoh like a puppet is able to choose death to avenge his family. Such a pharaoh isn't inferior to other pharaoh. Wu Ming's words shocked Nitornis. As for why, it was because no one had said such words to her before. I inform you as a great person. You should be proud of it. Thank you for your praise, Sir Villo. Master of Chaldea, with the help of someone like you, I don't have to worry about their safety. Nitornis didn't turn around and spoke with her back facing Wu Ming. Saying this, Nitocris left. This time, Wu Ming didn't stop Nitornis and let her leave on her own. I see. Great stupidity appears to be wisdom. Wu Ming nodded. As expected, a pharaoh, even if she was a puppet, wasn't someone without intelligence. Nitornis might have guessed that Wu Ming came to obtain the Holy Grail for Gadotsi. Although Wu Ming prepared to obtain the Holy Grail in order to ruin Artoria's plan, Wu Ming's goal of obtaining the Holy Grail was ultimately for Gadotsi, or rather, Chaldea. But the reason wasn't important anymore, because Wu Ming was about to face the Sun King, Ramses II, who held the Holy Grail. Without any hesitation, Wu Ming walked up to the stone door and used a little force. The stone door seemed to have some kind of mechanism, and Wu Ming pushed it open with a little force. The first thing that entered Wu Ming's eyes was the dazzling sunlight. Wu Ming squinted his eyes subconsciously. After that, an unusually spacious hall appeared in front of Wu Ming. Unlike the gloomy corridor that Wu Ming passed by before, this hall seemed to be under the sun. The hall was very spacious, and from the outside, it was impossible to tell that there was such a spacious space inside the hall. The walls around the hall were also engraved with murals, and the surrounding walls extended diagonally with the centermost point as the center. It felt like a pyramid. However, in this spacious space, it didn't seem like a pyramid at all. Only people with eyesight like Wu Ming could see it. At the very least, ordinary people like Gadotsi wouldn't be able to see it. Several thick, load-bearing pillars were arranged in a regular pattern in the hall. Sunlight that appeared out of nowhere sprinkled on the walls and floor, dyeing them with a layer of golden color. In the centermost position, there was a high platform that looked like a small pyramid. Step-like steps were located in front of this high platform. This was undoubtedly the throne. And at the highest point of this throne sat a dark-skinned man in gorgeous ancient Egyptian clothing. This should be Sun King, Ramses II. Chapter 710. The one sitting on the throne was indeed Ramses II. At this moment, Ramses II's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep from the long wait. After Wu Ming stared at the other party for a few seconds, Ramses II opened his eyes as if his heart was connected. Ramses II stared at Wu Ming's crimson eyes with his golden eyes and slowly opened his mouth. You're finally here, Origin Dragon. Ramses II's words made Wu Ming certain that the other party indeed knew his identity. Take a seat. After Ramses II finished speaking, a cloud of sand suddenly appeared on the throne to his side. The sand condensed and turned into a stone seat. Wu Ming's identity was qualified to sit on the same level as him, and Ramses II's personality wasn't as bad as Gilgamesh's, so he prepared a seat for Wu Ming. Wu Ming didn't argue and walked up the stairs to the throne. The reason why he didn't use a portal to go up directly was mainly to give the other party face. To be treated as an equal by such a king, even Wu Ming knew when to advance and when to retreat. Wu Ming walked up the throne unhurriedly and sat down on the seat that Ramses II had prepared for him. Then, Wu Ming's body surged with magic power and blue flames burned, covering Wu Ming's armor. Wu Ming waved his hand and the flames dissipated. Wu Ming, who was originally wearing armor, was now wearing a ceremonial robe that Wu Ming had worn in Camelot. The ceremonial robe was something that Wu Ming had casually condensed with magic power, so he changed into a ceremonial robe. After all, it was rude to wear armor during a meeting. Nice to meet you, Sun King Ramses II. I'm glad to be able to have a peaceful conversation with you. Wu Ming took the initiative to greet him. I'm also quite interested in your existence. Although you're still young, I can't see through your strength. As expected of the Great One, Ramses II maintained the posture of holding his head with one hand and commented on Wu Ming. I'm quite surprised by you. In my opinion, an existence like you should have the same personality as Gilgamesh. Wu Ming meant that Ramses II's attitude toward him was a little too good. As a pharaoh, the king of kings, I'm naturally arrogant, but my arrogance doesn't mean I'm extremely conceited. I'm different from the Golden King, Ramses II said while still holding his head with one hand. It seemed that Ramses II still knew Gilgamesh. Then, why don't you tell Pharaoh Nitornis about my true identity? As a pharaoh, the child of the sky god is still too immature, and I don't need to say more about this. She has already seen some clues. Although Ramses II's words were reasonable, Wu Ming felt that he was actually in a good mood and didn't tell Nitornis about Wu Ming's true identity. It was probably time to change the topic. Let's cut to the chase. Dragon of Origin, you came to my territory pretending to be a Lion King knight. What business do you have? Ramses II's eyes were arrogant and his voice was calm. There's no such thing as pretending. This body's spiritual base is King Arthur's knight. It's just that I tampered with it a little so that I can use the power of my true body. After all, Wu Ming thought that it would be a little difficult for him to deal with this singularity where the spiritual base of Vilo-Serenthod was severely damaged. Although it wasn't to the extent that he was lacking in strength, but if he really needed to fight, Wu Ming would have a hard time. After all, in many cases, violence was the best way to solve a problem, just like how Wu Ming persuaded Tristan to surrender with violence. Oh, that means you didn't come to me as a Lion King knight? Ramses II squinted his eyes and smiled. If that's the case, you should be here for the master of Chaldea. With just one sentence in the current situation, he was able to analyze the camp that Wu Ming belonged to. This made Wu Ming very impressed. As expected of one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt, his wisdom was also extraordinary. Indeed, for your action of letting Chaldea go, I would like to express my gratitude. There's no need for that. It's just that I'm slightly interested in the master of Chaldea. Ramses II rejected Wu Ming's gratitude. In response, Wu Ming smiled. If it's a kind interest, that's fine, but as Wu Ming spoke, magic surged around him. If it's a malicious interest, I won't sit back and watch your interest hurt Tachika, Sun King. Wu Ming's expression instantly became serious as he stared at Ramses II, as if he would attack at any moment. Oomph. Dragon of Origin, are you threatening me? Ramses II wasn't a mild-tempered person after all. In the face of Wu Ming's threatening words, he was naturally a little angry. I wouldn't dare. Tachika is like family to me. I think protecting family is something that everyone, even the king, wants to do no matter what. Although Wu Ming's words were reasonable, but Wu Ming's words reminded Ramses II of his beloved wife and the eldest son that she gave birth to but died of illness. Oomph. I don't want to treat the Dragon of Origin as a glib talker. You're here for the Holy Grail, right? Ramses II changed the topic again. That's right. Wu Ming nodded without hesitation. Seeing that Ramses II was speechless and changed the topic after being targeted by his words, Wu Ming also changed the topic. The Holy Grail is needed to repair the singularity. As long as the Holy Grail doesn't exist in this singularity, the era will slowly be repaired. However, Ramses II scoffed at Wu Ming's words. Oomph, you were King Arthur's knight. Although I don't know what the White King wants to do, I know one thing. After the Holy Grail is recovered, the singularity will never be properly repaired. Wu Ming frowned slightly. Ramses II didn't seem to be lying. Could it be that Artoria has some other plans? You should have seen the changes in this singularity. Even if the Holy Grail is recovered, before the singularity is completely repaired, if the Lion King wants to do something, the other party can do it. Ramses II's words made sense, because the singularity collapsed more severely. After the Holy Grail was recovered, the self-repair of this singularity wasn't as fast as other singularities. If Artoria had any plans at that time, then this singularity was indeed likely to have an accident. To be more serious, this singularity was likely to directly. There's no doubt that it will collapse. Chapter 711. Ramses II expressed his thoughts on behalf of Wu Ming. Even if I don't do anything, the Lion King alone can definitely do it. Ramses II held his face with one hand and showed a happy smile. Don't think that Ramses II was amiable in front of Wu Ming. It would be a big mistake to think that he was not that strong. If Wu Ming only appeared as a Vilo Sarenth, he would have no problem protecting himself when facing Ramses II. But if that was the case, Wu Ming would definitely not be able to defeat Ramses II. In mythology, Vilo Sarenth was actually a suspected dragon-type knight who held another holy sword. Wu Ming was the strongest, but he could only reach the level of the current Lion King, and the current Lion King could only fight to a draw with Ramses II. Of course, there was a reason for this tie. Ramses II wasn't interested in the battle with the Lion King, and the Lion King chose to find another way because he couldn't take down Ramses II in a short time. This led to the current situation of a tie. This gave people the feeling that Ramses II had the upper hand. After all, the Lion King was the first to propose a peace treaty. However, to be able to be in a state of polar opposites with Ramses II was enough to show the Lion King's strength. Therefore, no one would gossip about it. Even if Ramses II was serious, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. That was the goddess Artoria. It would not be a problem to call her the goddess Lungaminyat. Moreover, Artoria had anchors on both sides of the world. At the same time, it was her noble phantasm, the holy spear Lungaminyat. Ramses II was very strong. This was true. His noble phantasm was the temple complex here. In the temple, Ramses II was invincible. What's more, he had moved the other buildings in the desert here. Needless to say, he was very powerful. However, in terms of attack, he was slightly weaker than Artoria. After all, Artoria's noble phantasm was the holy spear, which was an offensive noble phantasm. Although Ramses II's great temple was also offensive, it was nothing compared to the holy spear Lungaminyat. As the King of Kings, Ramses II was indeed very arrogant. However, his arrogance didn't mean that he was a fool. He was aware that his attack was weaker than his opponent's. However, thou need not worry that I will add fuel to the fire at that time. Although I act according to my mood, I will not do something like destroying mankind. These words changed Wu Ming's impression of Ramses II. No matter how willful he was, his duty to protect others would never change. It did not mean that the person who possessed the Holy Grail created by the Demon God King was the source of the disturbance to the singularity. After all, if I don't have my people, who should I lead? Well, Wu Ming's impression of Ramses II returned. He was a willful king, just like Gilgamesh. Before I came here, I went to the holy city and talked to my king. I don't think she's lying to me. Ignoring Ramses II's bad personality, Wu Ming expressed his personal opinion. So, I don't think she will destroy the singularity like you said. Artoria's plan was to preserve the purity of mankind. Whether it was Artoria, Gawain, or Guinevere, they all said so. Wu Ming did not think that they would work together to deceive him. And if the truth was as they said, there was no way to destroy the singularity. However, Ramses II had no reason to lie. No, it should be said that a person like Ramses II would not lie. Then could it be that Wu Ming suddenly thought of something? Could it be that Artoria didn't tell anyone or Wu Ming the real plan and was prepared to rely on her own strength to carry out the plan? And the implementation of Artoria's plan would lead to the destruction of the singularity, as Ramses II said. If that was the case, Why would Artoria lie to Wuming? This was also easy to explain. Artoria's body had matured, and because she had held the Holy Spear for a long time, she had been deified by the Holy Spear Maiden. It was inevitable that her inner thoughts would change. Therefore, even if it was Wuming who was the closest to her, it was a thing of the past. Thou art a smart man. I have made it so clear, so thou shouldst understand. Ramses II held his crooked head with one hand and tapped his throne with the other. Indeed, Ramses II had made it clear. You're right. However, all of this is just a guess. Wuming looked at Ramses II without the slightest hesitation and wasn't affected by his words. He. Huh? Ramses II burst into laughter. Not bad at all. As expected of the Dragon of Origin. My conversation with you was subpar, but I am quite satisfied. After laughing, Ramses II nodded in satisfaction. He didn't know if it was Wu Ming's illusion, but Wu Ming felt that there was something wrong with Ramses II's hand holding his head. Wu Ming shook his head and stopped thinking about these messy and unrealistic things. Then, can you give me the Holy Grail? Wu Ming went straight to the point. Fortunately, Gadotsi and the others weren't around. Otherwise, they would be shocked. After all, how could they give something to someone so directly? However, a golden light flashed before Wu Ming's eyes, and he caught it subconsciously. Wu Ming took a closer look. It was a golden cup, the Holy Grail. This thing isn't of much use to me. If thou wants it, then take it. Thank you. Wu Ming thanked him and put away the Holy Grail. With this, Wu Ming finally understood. Ramses II had never treated anyone as an enemy. As the pharaoh who ruled over thousands of people, the king of gods, and the king of kings, other than himself, and the people he acknowledged, everyone else was equal. There was no such thing as enemies or non-enemies. Therefore, Ramses II fought with the Lion King calmly. After the other party proposed a peace treaty, Ramses II agreed without hesitation. And Gadotsi was able to leave the desert so smoothly because of Ramses II's indulgence. It was also because of this that he gave the Holy Grail to Wu Ming. What a willful king. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Boom! Chapter 712. Boom! The sound of explosions continued to come from the outside. Even the hall where Ramses II and Wu Ming were in shook faintly. Ramses II chuckled and looked at Wu Ming. That's thy kin. The son of the sky seems to be fighting with the other party. After all, this was Ramses II's territory and the temple complex. He had great control over the surroundings, so even if he was in the temple, he could still see what was happening outside. Hearing Ramses II's words, Wu Ming thought to himself, as expected. Even if Ramses II didn't say anything, Wu Ming knew that it was definitely Jillian who was causing trouble. Although the magic link wasn't connected, Wu Ming didn't mean that Wu Ming wasn't in the same state as his servant. Wu Ming felt it very clearly. Jillian's magic power was being consumed, and she was most likely releasing Sky Strike. I'm a fool to expect her to be honest alone. Wu Ming sighed and shook his head helplessly. I owe you a favor, Wu Ming said and stood up. Giving him the Holy Grail for free was already a great favor. In addition, Wu Ming's people were causing trouble outside. In any case, Wu Ming was in the wrong. As Wu Ming stood up, a black-purple ripple appeared beside Wu Ming. Oh, spatial magic, Ramses II said with interest. It's not spatial magic, just a little trick. Wu Ming shook his head. Then, I'll take my leave first, Wu Ming said and walked into the portal. The black-purple ripple swallowed Wu Ming's body and then disappeared. Ramses II looked at the place where Wu Ming disappeared and closed his eyes. Where's the root dragon? Ramses II said with a chuckle. It was unknown whether it was mockery or admiration. Outside the temple, a black-purple portal appeared in the sky, and Wu Ming's figure appeared. As long as Wu Ming had been to a place without restrictions, he could use the portal to quickly move. Because of the advance notice, Ramses II temporarily opened up space authority to Wu Ming, so Wu Ming could teleport in Ramses II's temple. Using telekinesis to float in the air, Wu Ming looked down. Jillian held a purple scythe condensed from magic and slaughtered a large group of Sphinx. Jillian's scythe was like a wheat harvester, harvesting the Sphinx and releasing energy pillars from time to time, which caused the earth rumbled. The energy pillars were simply magic power released by Jillian in the form of a pillar. There was no fancy stuff, but because of the purity of the energy pillars and Jillian's reckless use, Wuming felt the tremors and Jillian's wanton release of magic power. Ha ha! Come and kill! Ha ha! Jillian laughed maniacally as she killed, as if she had entered a state of madness. The Sphinx seemed to be endless. They kept surging out of the sand and charged at Jillian. However, even if Jillian was in a frenzy, her nature as a weapon would not change. Using her wings and her petite body, Gopral jumped up and down among the Sphinxes. These 3-meter-tall Sphinxes were unable to catch Gopral. They couldn't even catch a single feather of hers. Instead, the Sphinx were cut into several pieces by Jillian's scythe and turned into pure magic power that dissipated. In addition to the frenzied Jillian and the resolute Sphinx, Wuming also saw another figure behind the Sphinx army, Pharaoh Nitornis. The Sphinx army seemed to have been summoned by Nitornis. However, Nitornis would cast a few magic spells on Jillian from time to time. There were also attacks like Mummy's Claw and Sacred Beetle's Charge, but these attacks and magic spells had no effect on Jillian without exception. Basically, these attacks were either deflected by Jillian's scythe or dodged by Jillian agilely. After that, Nitornis seemed to have given up and focused on summoning the Sphinx army. Sacred Beetles, Mummies, Sphinx army. Wuming could not help but ridicule Nitornis. Nitornis was really like a summoner. Like a summoner, Nitornis held the staff in her hand and constantly released magic power on the ground. It seemed that these endless Sphinx were summoned by Nitornis. If Ramses II authorized it, then it would be easy for Nitornis to summon the endless Sphinx army in the desert where the shrine was located. Giliel, on the other hand, seemed to have been dominated by madness. She didn't care about Nitocris, the summoner at the back at all. Instead, she threw herself into the endless swarm of Sphinxes. However, in Wuming's opinion, it was very likely that Gopral didn't attack Nitocris because she was in a berserk state. After all, if Nitornis was defeated, the Sphinx army was likely to disappear. In that case, Jillian would not be able to enjoy the fun of killing. But even if Gopral didn't attack Nitocris, she wouldn't be able to enjoy the fun of the battle anymore. Why? Because Wuming was here. Calm down, Jillian. Wuming's voice came into Jillian's ears, which made Jillian stunned. Since Jillian and Wuming signed a dependent contract, Jillian became Wuming's dependent. Although Wuming could make those who surrendered to him and became his dependent completely obey him, it was a bit cruel for those who volunteered to become Wuming's dependent. Volunteering represented trust in Wuming, and if Wuming did that, he would fail to live up to the trust of his dependents, so Wuming would never do that. However, authority was authority. As mentioned before, the dependent authority could make Wuming's dependents subtly change their minds, making them loyal to Wuming from the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, even if Wuming did not use coercive orders, Wuming's dependents would have a feeling of being unable to disobey Wuming's orders. Jillian was like that now. Because she heard Wuming's words, she subconsciously paused for a moment. It was precisely because of this critical pause that the Sphinx army swarmed in and buried Jillian. Chapter 7:13. Sky Strike. Suddenly, a voice that sounded like an incantation came from the Sphinx army that had buried Jillian. In an instant, the Sphinx army stopped moving as if someone had pressed the pause button. Boom! Immediately after, a violent explosion erupted at the location where Gopral was engulfed by the Sphinx army. What? Nitoris, who was at the back of the Sphinx army, was shocked when she saw this. She did not expect the hot-tempered guy to have such a trick up his sleeve. Blue mana exploded in a semicircle and spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed. The earth seemed to have been plowed to one side, and the blue magic explosion directly annihilated a layer of earth. The explosion destroyed the earth, causing the earth to shake even more violently than the earthquake that Wu Ming felt just now. At the edge of the explosion, soil splashed everywhere, and in the next second, the splashed soil was absorbed by the continuous explosion, following in the footsteps of the former. All the Sphinx that were affected by the blue magic explosion were destroyed without exception. Boom, 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 boom. Every Sphinx that was caught in the blast exploded in loud explosions. The Sphinx army was dying at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even Netoris was a little flustered by this sudden event. Wah, wah. Affected by the earthquake, Netoris couldn't help but take 2 steps back. She propped her scepter on the ground. Naturally, the summoning of the Sphinx army was interrupted. Meanwhile, Giliel's Skystrike had wiped out the Sphinx army. As Gopril was distracted by Wu Ming's words, the Sphinx army swarmed forward, which made Gopril's Skystrike more convenient. All in all, it was a great victory for Jillian. Nidicol's came to her senses and looked in Jillian's direction with resentment. Giliel's eyes were red as she smiled cruelly at Nitocris. Her pure white wings, which hadn't been stained by the battle, suddenly flapped, and Giliel charged towards Nitocris. Damn it! Netoris gnashed her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. After witnessing Jillian's strength, she was fully aware that she couldn't last more than 1 round against her. In Netoris's eyes, Jillian was a weapon born for battle. She was just an unqualified pharaoh, so how could she possibly defeat such a monster? That's all I can do. Netoris stood up with her scepter and made up her mind. She was ready to use her precious artifact. Although Giliel would most likely die if she used that noble artifact, if she didn't use it, the next one to die would most likely be her, Nidicol's. After all, to deal with such a monster, if she did not use her relic, she would not even have a way to self-destruct. It's about time to stop, Jillian. At this moment, Wu Ming's voice resounded through the sky. As if afraid that Jillian couldn't hear him, Wu Ming's voice wasn't soft this time. It wasn't soft to the point that Netoris heard it. Lord Villo. Netoris was shocked. It was reasonable for Netoris to be shocked. After all, Netoris was going to kill Jillian, and Jillian was Wu Ming's subordinate. This was no less than killing her knight in front of the Lion King. How could Nidicol's not be startled by this? Of course, if she was judged to have failed, it could only be considered an attempt. After all, Netoris had yet to make her move. Although Netoris didn't make her move, Jillian didn't stop moving. Although Jillian heard Wu Ming's words and lowered her speed subconsciously, she didn't stop completely. Jillian still flew toward Netoris. It was apparent that Jillian was affected by the berserk state. Wu Ming, who had been watching from the side for a while, naturally noticed it. That was why he didn't intend to use words to stop Jillian. Clank! The sound of chains slithering entered Jillian's ears. Several golden ripples appeared behind Wu Ming, and the chains within the ripples shot toward Jillian. Jillian didn't turn around to observe. She was confident that she could dodge the chains by relying on her voice and instincts. But how could Wu Ming let her do as she wished? Boom! Jillian came to a halt, as though she had crashed into an invisible wall. At the same time, she let out a muffled groan. Jillian's scarlet eyes, that gradually lost her rationality, revealed a trace of doubt. Feeling the strange tightness in her body, she looked at her body. Silver whitish chains appeared in the purplish-black ripples around Jillian out of nowhere. This was the combination of Wu Ming's teleportation gate and pseudo-skylock. As it was easy to use, Wu Ming had used it more than once. The pseudo-sky lock-bound Jillian's limbs, body, and wings. Not only that, but the chains also extended and wrapped around Jillian like living creatures. Gradually, Gopril was entangled by the pseudo-heavenly shackles until she was like a mummy. Her exposed skin was almost completely entangled by the chains, and only a small part of her skin was revealed. Jillian subconsciously released her magical powers to break free from the chains. In the end, she discovered that only the exposed skin released a trace of magical powers. The magical powers that she released basically disappeared like air in a leaking balloon when they came into contact with the chains. My magical powers were absorbed? This was Jillian's last thought before she lost her vision. Shortly after, her head was wrapped by the snake-like chains. At the same time, she closed her eyes and fell into a coma. At that moment, Jillian's entire body, including her head, was wrapped in layers of silver-whitish chains. At that moment, Jillian, who had lost an absolute part of her rationality, was subdued. On the other side, at Wu Ming's location, Wu Ming's hands were wrapped in a large number of chains. The chains that extended from Wu Ming's arms entered the purplish-black ripples of the teleportation gate. Wu Ming didn't move at all. He only created some pseudo-skylocks and used the teleportation gate to launch a surprise attack on Jillian. As for Jillian's magical powers being absorbed, that wasn't right. Jillian's magical powers should have been annihilated. Chapter 714. As mentioned before, Wu Ming cheated by bringing his noble phantasm, 12 avatars of authority, to this spiritual base. However, the ability of these 12 avatars could only be used once in this spiritual base. Once one of them was used, there would be one less avatar, just like a consumable item. Wu Ming summoned Skywing and Abendheim using the 8th avatar, so Wu Ming only had 11 avatars left. When Wu Ming made the pseudo-heavenly lock, he deliberately used one of the remaining 11 avatars. Wu Ming added the 5th avatar's annihilation characteristic to the pseudo-heavenly lock, which made the person bound by the pseudo-heavenly lock be annihilated. Of course, Wu Ming could choose what to annihilate the other party, whether it was the body or the magical power. It was up to Wu Ming's precise control. Wu Ming chose the magical power released from the surface of Giliel's skin to annihilate, so Giliel's body was not damaged. However, this was not without drawbacks. The pseudo-heavenly lock with the annihilation characteristic could no longer retain the ability to restrain divinity. Originally, Wu Ming could use high-grade items to create the pseudo-heavenly lock with the effect of restraining divinity, but when the avatar of annihilation was added to the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock, the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock were annihilated. Or it should be said that the ability of annihilation annihilated the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock. And because there was only one characteristic of the heavenly lock, that was, the higher the divinity of the person bound, the tighter the heavenly lock would bind. Therefore, after the annihilation characteristic was added, the restraining divinity characteristic disappeared. But that didn't matter. After all, the pseudo-heavenly lock could be recreated. On the contrary, the chains with the annihilation characteristic could only be found by chance. After all, Wu Ming's annihilation avatar had been used, and there were only 10 avatars left. Although the 12 incarnations had become a consumable item, Razin still had to use it. After all, if he didn't use it, why would Wu Ming bother to bring the 12 incarnations here? Controlling the pseudo-sky lock, or rather the annihilation lock, Wu Ming sent the unconscious Jillian into the portal. Jillian's unconsciousness wasn't caused by Wu Ming's annihilation lock. It was only because Jillian had overused her mana. Generally speaking, excessive mana consumption would only cause one to become extremely weak. Worse, one might not even be able to maintain a physical body and be forced to enter a spiritual state. The main reason why Jillian was unconscious was that Wu Ming had forcefully stopped her while she was flying at high speed. When she released her mana, it was instantly annihilated, causing her to fall unconscious. While Gopral was unconscious, Wu Ming had already connected to Gopral's spirit base and started providing her with magic power. Although Wu Ming had consumed a lot of mana when summoning the Skywing species and a Bante, Wu Ming could still provide for a servant. After Gopral was completely engulfed by the black-purple teleportation gate, Silent Cry landed. "I'm sorry, Pharaoh Nitornis. I didn't manage my subordinates well." Wu Ming, who came in front of Nitornis, said to Nitornis. In any case, it could be seen from Jillian's final impact that she had the desire to kill Nitornis. Wu Ming also saw that Nitornis was ready to release her noble phantasm. If Wu Ming didn't stop her, either one of Jillian and Nitornis would leave, or both of them would leave together. After all, it was very likely that when Nitornis released her noble phantasm to take Jillian away, Jillian also took the opportunity to take Nitornis away. In short, they would die together. If that happened, there would be a rift between him and Ramses II. If he came to the other party's territory and his subordinates died together with the other party's subordinates, regardless of whether Wuming had malicious intentions or not, he would become enemies with the other party. Wuming would think of the worst-case scenario. After all, there was no harm in preparing for a rainy day. But fortunately, all of this was stopped by Wuming. "You're exaggerating, Sir Villo." Nitornis stood firm and shook her head. "By the way, do you know what's going on? Why did Jillian fall into such a state of madness?" Although Wuming knew that Jillian wasn't honest, Jillian shouldn't have fallen into madness so easily. Although it was also possible that Jillian wanted to play around and ended up screwing up. "I don't really understand." Nitornis shook her head. Immediately after, Nitornis told Wuming everything she knew. After Nitornis sent Wuming to the main hall, where Ramses II was, she left the main hall and went outside. Then, she saw Jillian teasing the Sphinx group responsible for guarding the place. Nitornis was dissatisfied and stopped Jillian with words. In the end, Jillian stopped teasing the Sphinx group and started chatting with Nitornis. Although Nitocris was rather surprised, after exchanging names with Gopral and attempting to chat with her, she found that Gopral wasn't a bad person. Thus, the two of them began to converse. Although they might develop into enemies because of their respective masters, neither Nitornis nor Jillian was worried. Once they became enemies, they would go all out. Be it Nitornis's loyalty to Ramses II or Jillian's loyalty to Wuming. They wouldn't let the two of them stop just because they had a good chat. Although it sounded cruel, that was the truth. Afterward, when they talked about the sandstorm they encountered when they first entered the desert, Nitornis said, "I did it." After that, Giliel smiled and began her attack on Nitocris. It had to be said that Nitornis was still too naive. Jillian was clearly tricking her. Jillian was rather concerned about the unkillable sandstorm. Although the Skywings were not as vengeful as the forest goblins, Jillian was not the kind of person who wouldn't get back at someone for smashing her place. Jillian attacked Nitornis, but Nitornis found it rather baffling because she didn't know what she had said wrong. However, since the other party had attacked, Nitornis would not passively take the beating. As a pharaoh, Nitornis naturally used magic and summoned servants to attack, but as mentioned before, whether it was the scarabs, mummies, or magic, they all had little effect on Jillian. Only a large creature like the Sphinx could slightly restrain Jillian. Thus, Nitornis began to summon the Sphinx frantically. Wuming knew what happened next. In other words, Jillian gradually lost her rationality in the battle. Chapter 7:15. Although she was furious that Nitocris had used the sandstorm to toy with her, she was in no hurry to kill Nitocris because she wanted to play with her. Instead, she fought with Nitocris' summoned creatures in an attempt to find joy in the slaughter. Although Nitocris was a pharaoh and had a powerful noble phantasm, if Gypril assassinated her or launched a surprise attack, Nitocris might not be able to use her noble phantasm. After all, Gypril's physical attributes were very powerful. Based on the servant panel, it was the attributes of a top-notch servant. Therefore, Gypril, who did not directly kill Nitocris, actually wanted to play with Nitocris to avenge the shame of the sandstorm. As a result, when Gypril fought with the Sphinx summoned by Nitocris, Gypril was gradually affected by Berserk to the extent that she did not even listen to Wuming's words. Although it was not clear whether this was the case or not, Wuming felt that his judgment was correct. In short, in fact, Gypril reaped what she sowed. Wuming's tone was somewhat helpless, but things had already happened, and Wuming could only smile. "That, Sir Villo." Nitocris looked like she wanted to say something, but hesitated. "If you have something to say, just say it. After all, this time we are in the wrong." Wuming calmly signaled Nitocris to speak her mind. "Yes." Nitocris nodded. "Although I am not a member of your camp, if possible, please do not punish Miss Gypril. If I understand correctly, are you pleading for her?" Wuming glanced at Nidicles in surprise. Nidicles' pleading for Jaipuril was beyond Wuming's expectations. That's right. Miss Jillian and I hit it off quite well. I feel quite happy chatting with her. Although I don't know why Miss Jillian would suddenly attack me. I think it should be because Miss Jillian was affected by the berserk skill. This made Wuming even more astonished. Even now, Natakris still couldn't tell that Jillian was only pretending to chat with her. Her true goal was to get information out of her. Can I ask why? Wuming asked. Nidicles hesitated. Seeing such a Nidicles, Wuming quickly waved his hand. Of course, if it's inconvenient, you don't have to say it. However, Nidicles shook her head. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Then, as if she had made up her mind, Nidicles began to explain. Lord Varen, I'm sure you already know that I became a pharaoh because I was pushed to that position by someone else. To put it simply, I'm just a puppet. Nidicles' eyes wavered, as if she was recalling the events of her life. But even so, I'm prepared to become a pharaoh, the son of God, the king of gods. But the price is that I don't have any close friends. As she spoke, Nitornis's eyes dimmed. After being hastily pushed to the position of pharaoh, her original friends were probably gradually estranged from her because of the difference between human and God. But I still have my brother. I can chat with him in my free time and relax my tense heart. Just that alone is enough for me. Thinking of her family, Nidicles' eyes showed a trace of gentleness. But my only family member, my brother, was branded with a groundless crime. He was murdered by those who pushed me to the position of pharaoh and treated me as a puppet. Nidicles' tone carried a trace of grief and indignation. They even deliberately let me know of this news and talked about it in front of me, as if they were showing off. Because she was a puppet, a bird in a cage, there was no need to avoid it. Because she was a puppet, a fish in a pond, there was no need to fear it. And because she was a puppet, something in the palm of her hand, there was no need to be vigilant. And the result was, I killed them, said Natakris, neither sad nor happy. They never thought that I would attack them. I still remember their expressions of despair before they were drowned. Although Natakris's words were cruel, there was no complacency on her face from her successful revenge. Because it was meaningless. Why was it meaningless? It was because my family member can't be revived. Even if I cut them into pieces, he still can't be revived. Nidicles gripped the scepter tightly, as if it was going to break. I lost my family member who understood me. I also thought that my actions of murder disqualified me from the position of pharaoh. In the end, I chose to kill myself. Nidicles finished speaking. During this time, Wuming did not say a word. Since Nidicles had spoken to this extent, Wuming more or less understood. She was willing to gamble her life for her family because her family understood her. Whether it was because they understood that Nidicles was her family or because she was Nidicles' family, it was not important. What was important was that she no longer had a close friend. After talking with Gopril for a while, Nidicles clearly felt that Gopril could understand her and could become her close friend. This was normal. After all, Nidicles had only lived for a short period of time and did not have many close friends. Moreover, after becoming a follower, she had been staying with Ramses II. To Nidicles, Ramses II was someone who required respect and loyalty, so they could not become close friends. It could be said that Gopril was the first woman other than Chaldea who could become Nidicles' close friend. It was because of this that Nidicles would cover up Chaldea's group who had only saved her life. It was also because of this that Nidicles did not use a killing move on Gopril from the start. On the other hand, the reason why Gopril didn't attack Nitornis directly was most likely because she had a good impression of her, so she decided to tease her. As for killing Nidicles later on, Wuming guessed that it was because she was under the influence of berserk. Nidicles was prepared to use a noble artifact on Gopril in the end because she was at her wit's end. As mentioned before, if the two of them became enemies, she would definitely not hold back. Nidicles could not die yet. At the very least, she could not die in such a sullen manner. At the very least, she had to be loyal to Ramses II. As for whether or not Giliel and Natakris had taken a liking to each other, They could only wait until Gilliel woke up to find out. Although Miss Gopperl had the intention to scout for information in the beginning, I could sense that she was indeed very happy during the conversation. That wasn't an act. Nitoris exonerated Gopperl. If possible, please don't punish her. After saying that, Nidicles had a pleased look on her face. Woman could only smile helplessly. Don't worry, I won't punish her. Chapter 716. I don't have the habit of punishing my subordinates, so even if you say so, I won't punish her. Wuming's words made Nitocris calm down. Thank you, Sir Villo. However, Wuming was puzzled. I remember you said that you knew that Jillian was chatting with you to get information from you, right? Nitocris nodded with a smile. Sir Villo, you can't be thinking of me as a fool, right? I'm a pharaoh after all. How can I not have some wisdom? After all, when Nitocris drowned those in power who murdered her brother, she used a scheme. In other words, actually, I'm very smart, Wuming smiled helplessly. Although he was helpless, Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's about time. My purpose of coming here has been achieved. I'm going to leave now. He got the Holy Grail and didn't fight with Ramses II. Although Jillian had a fight with Nitocris because of her berserk state, nothing happened in the end. So Wuming was ready to leave. By the way, Sir Villo, I have something to report. When she heard that Wuming was leaving, Nitocris instantly remembered something. What's the matter? Wuming looked at Nitocris puzzledly. He shouldn't have any other connection with this place. It's like this. Sir Osmondes captured a knight from the Holy City not long ago. Knight? Wuming was stunned at first. Then he thought of something. It can't be Tristan, right? That's a knight who uses a magic bow. Well, it's really Tristan. I have to say that this guy is really unlucky. He was just sent to the desert by Wuming to be on standby and gather information, but he was captured not long after. However, if it was really Tristan, why couldn't Wuming sense Tristan's location? After all, Wuming was currently Tristan's temporary master. Lord Osmondes inadvertently noticed that someone was scouting for information about the terrain nearby, so he directly captured that person and imprisoned him under the pyramid, isolating him. This finally resolved Wuming's doubts. It turned out that the barrier had cut off his perception of Tristan. And because Tristan didn't leave, the contract between him and Wuming was still intact. That was why Wuming didn't realize that Tristan was captured. Lord Osmondes told me to hand him over to you if you want to leave. Hold on. Wuming suddenly spoke, interrupting Nitocris. I don't want it anymore. Let him continue to stay under the pyramid. Wuming's words stunned Nitocris. Why did he not want it? Thank you, Ramses II, for taking care of Tristan for me. Remember to thank him for me. I'll take my leave first. What a joke. How could Wuming not know what kind of person Tristan was? If he were to return to Artoria, then he would be a great help. It was better to let Tristan stay here. After Wuming finished speaking, the dark purple teleportation door opened. Without waiting for Nitocris to react, Wuming plunged into it. Then, the dark purple teleportation door closed. Okay. Only then did Nitocris react, and she nodded subconsciously. However, Wuming had already left. In the lower level of the pyramid in the barrier prison, Tristan sat on the stone bed. He looked at his empty hands because his weapons were confiscated and sighed. Sigh. I'm so sad. On the ground that seemed to have been scorched by flames, the huge floating tree with crystal leaves and a scarlet trunk, a Bonnie Heim, floated in the sky. The crystal-like leaves continued to sway with the airflow in the sky, refracting the sunlight in all directions. The huge tree that was like a floating island gave off a harmless feeling under the sunlight. However, under this seemingly peaceful scene, there was a hidden killing intent. The skywing species had entered a standby state. As the existence of a skywing species home, Abani's responsibility was not small. Although Abanti usually looked harmless, that was only because the skywing species were there, so there was no need for it to do anything. Now, Abanti, who shouldered the heavy responsibility of protecting the skywing species, was in a state of high alert. In the sky above Abanti, a dark purple ripple suddenly appeared. Accompanied by the sound of chains, an angel-like figure fell. It was the unconscious Giliel. When Abani saw that the newcomer was someone he knew, some of the tiny tree trunks on his body instantly lengthened and extended, catching Jillian. Immediately after, another dark purple ripple appeared, and Wuming's figure appeared in the sky. Seeing that the master was loyal to had arrived, Abanti controlled many red branches to extend over. Although it knew that its master could fly, it still had to show some sincerity. Wuming gave Abani a lot of face, free-falling onto the red branches that Abani had extended over. Standing on Abani's branches, Wuming arrived on a platform on Abani's body as if he was taking an elevator. Beside him, Giliel was also placed on the ground by Abani. The scarlet branches retreated like tentacles, leaving only Wuming and the unconscious Giliel on the platform. Abanti, send Giliel to her room. No one responded to Wuming, and Abanti used its actions to prove its obedience. The platform beneath Gopral seemed to have melted, and Gopral slowly sank down. This was Abani's ability, so Wuming did not panic. Giliel completely sank into the softened platform. In just a few seconds, Giliel disappeared, and the platform returned to its original state. A very convenient ability, Wuming commented. It had to be said that the Skywings had truly made the right choice in choosing to live on Abani's body. Abani's mobile, multi-purpose aerial fortress was truly amazing. However, looking at Abani at his feet, Wuming suddenly remembered something. I seem to have been tricked by Ramses II. It had to be said that it was Ramses II who had launched an attack on Wuming's side first. Wuming had gone this time to get back at him and take the Holy Grail. However, after busying himself for so long, Wuming ended up owing the other party a favor. Although Ramses had launched that attack to determine whether Wuming's faction had the right to exist, it was still the other party who had made the first move. Furthermore, Wuming had been blinded by the Holy Grail. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Wuming shrugged. After all, there was nothing for Ramses II to do. After dealing with the problem of Artoria, he would hand over the Holy Grail to Gadatsi. Let's go take a look at the situation of the Skywings. Abani understood, and the platform under Wuming's feet softened. Wuming's body slowly sank as if he had sunk into a swamp. Aside from the Skywings, the big screen also showed the monitoring of the corridor. Looking at the monitoring, Wuming suddenly felt that something was wrong with the big screen. He seemed to have seen a black shadow flash across the corridor. He checked the big screen again, trying to find something wrong, but no matter how carefully he looked, he couldn't see anything different. Was it my imagination? Wuming frowned. No, that can't be it. It can't be your imagination. Wuming had always trusted his sixth sense, and every time he followed it, it was always correct. Wuming was sure that something had gotten into Abani's body. Furthermore, that black shadow he had just caught gave Wuming a sense of danger. A powerful stealth ability, a strange movement technique, and something that even made Wuming feel a sense of danger. Combined with this singularity, Wuming could only think of one person. First Hassan. Wuming had just finished speaking when he saw a sword flash coming at him. Chapter 718. Wuming instinctively tried to dodge, only to realize that it was futile. I can't dodge it. Wuming was alarmed. The sword flash was clearly not fast, but Wuming had the feeling that he could not dodge it. Squelch. With a squelch, half of Wuming's arm was chopped off, and blood gushed out. However, Wuming only frowned. Without saying a word, he raised his other arm and punched behind him. Boom! Along with the golden light, the fist collided with the dark and gloomy 1-meter-tall skull shield. The powerful force caused the atmosphere to tremble. At this moment, Aban also reacted. This was its body, and it did not even know that someone had snuck in. This was a great humiliation. In an instant, Countless branch-like tentacles pierced towards the place where Wu Ming had attacked like sharp swords. Whoosh! The sword flashed, and Aban's branch-like tentacles were shattered one by one, as if they were dead. At this moment, the Skywings in their rooms were also awakened by the battle between Wu Ming, Abant, and the enemy. In their respective rooms, they suddenly opened their eyes. The golden pupils of the sword and the shield instantly turned into scarlet pupils of the sword talisman. Like ghosts, the Skywings collectively passed through the illusory walls of their rooms and headed in Wu Ming's direction. Because of the Skywings' ability to pass through walls, the walls were just a layer of colored air to them. Everyone stop! Wu Ming yelled at the air. Wu Ming knew very well who the other party was. Apart from the first Hassan, Wu Ming could not think of anyone else who could be the Crown Assassin spirit base. Thus, the other party could not be dealt with by relying on numbers. Even if this number was supplemented by the Skywings, it would not be enough. Wu Ming's order caused the Skywings, who had been rushing toward Wu Ming, to collectively stop. Some of the Skywings had even entered Wu Ming's room. "Return to your rooms and wait for further orders," Wu Ming said as he gave his second order. Whether it was the Skywings who had already reached Wu Ming's room or the other Skywings who had not made it in time, they collectively bowed and left with their heads lowered. The Skywings retreated to their rooms, but they continued to stare at Wu Ming's room with their scarlet eyes. Although Silent Wonder was very dissatisfied that the Skywings were berserkers, he had to admit that there was a benefit to berserker servants, and that was that they were exceptionally obedient. When Wu Ming said everyone stop, it naturally included Abenheim, so Aben did not attack again. "First Hassan, you and I have nothing to do with each other, so why are you trying to assassinate me?" Wu Ming said in an unfriendly tone as he looked at the shadow where Wu Ming had attacked. The entire room was enveloped by the light from the large screen, and only the corner behind Wu Ming was dark. "Do you have to be so obvious? Did you have to be so obvious?" The reason it was a shadow was because Wu Ming still could not see who the other party was. However, other than the mysterious first Hassan, who had such powerful stealth abilities and strength that could injure Wu Ming could not think of anyone else. It was as if he had given up because he had not killed the enemy in one strike, or perhaps he had achieved his goal. The shadow in the corner dissipated, revealing a tall figure. He was over 2 meters tall and wore shabby dark armor. The armor's shoulders, elbows, knees, and even back had decorative barbs that pointed upward. He held a simple and worn-out greatsword in his right hand, and his left hand held a meter-tall shield that also had barbs. Most importantly, the other party's armor had a rather shabby cloak and a skull mask. If it was a mask, it would not be too accurate because the other party's skull mask was more like a helmet than a mask. A skull with strange horns wrapped tightly around the other party's head. Although the area near the chin was not covered by the skull, what was revealed was darkness. Only the area around the eyes had a dark blue flame that looked like a soul fire burning dimly. With his skull face alone, Wu Ming was sure that the other party was indeed First Hassan, and it was definitely the First Hassan. Crack, crack, crack. With a little cracking sound, the shield held by the First Hassan cracked and then shattered. The fragments turned into a black mist and entangled into the dark cloak behind the First Hassan. The First Hassan, who lost the shield in his left hand, chose to touch the tip of the great sword to the ground and press the hilt of the great sword with both hands as if he was leaning on a crutch. "Answer my question, First Hassan," Wu Ming repeated in a more unfriendly tone. Wu Ming was indeed easy to talk to, but this did not mean that Wu Ming would tolerate being cut by someone and losing an arm. Moreover, Wu Ming was not afraid of the crown servant. He had 12 incarnations. If Wu Ming wanted, he could make the First Hassan leave here. "The bell of thy evening has not rung, but thy destiny has deviated." An old and deep voice came from under the mask of the First Hassan. Wu Ming was dumbfounded. What is this? The bell of the evening did not ring. It should be saying that he should not die yet. Wu Ming felt like he was scolding himself, but it was the truth. "Then why did you come to cut me?" According to Wu Ming's knowledge, the First Hassan was the one who beheaded Hassan who had gone astray. Although it did not mean that the First Hassan would only attack Hassan, Wu-ming did not understand why the other party attacked him. The two had no interest disputes at all, and Wu-ming also saved the life of Hassan. Could it be that the other party was here to thank him? However, this thank you gift was really too heavy, wasn't it? Also, what does deviated destiny mean? Is it possible that there is something that needs me to do, but I didn't do it? Even if it was a reminder, why did you have to cut me directly? The first Hassan had the ability to kill the opponent instantly. Wu-ming could also feel the power of instant death from the cut, but the cut on Wu-ming did not trigger the instant death effect at all. Wu-ming's body was 100% immune to such means, but this spiritual base was not immune. In other words, the first Hassan did not want to kill him at all. The destiny of the winged otherworlder and the behemoth floating in the mortal world is different. I want to silence it on behalf of God. The first Hassan spoke again. Wu-ming frowned. Is it because the skywing species and Abani are not native residents of this world? So they were targeted by the first Hassan, and I was only forced to take a cut. Chapter 719. The Skywings and Abaniheim were not products of this planet, which meant that they were actually stowaways. As the thugs of the restraining power, the crown servants were there to deal with these stowaways. However, with the relationship between Wu-ming and the restraining power, how could the restraining power attack Wu-ming? Furthermore, the first Hassan had aimed at Wu-ming, so Wu-ming did not understand what was going on. However, after hearing the first Hassan's next words, Wu-ming understood. However, the blade has already been unsheathed. There is no second strike. To put it simply, the first Hassan had let go of the Skywings and Abaniheim. So, in other words, Wu-ming had taken the punishment on behalf of the Skywings and Aban Wu-ming, who had figured it out, sighed, and the anger in his heart dissipated. Now, the world was in a state of burning humanity, and the restraining power, Alea, was definitely not in a good state. The first Hassan might have been sent out to help Chaldea save humanity. The first Hassan's mission was to find out about the abnormalities, and the Skywings and Abani, as stowaways, were definitely one of the abnormalities, which was the so-called violation of destiny. Destiny was an established fact. Originally, there were no such conspicuous existences like Abanti and the Skywings in history, so this was considered a violation of destiny. Take the Lionheart King, who was currently in the Holy City, as an example. She had replaced the Lionheart King to rule the Holy City, which was considered a change of fate and could also be considered as taking over the Lionheart King's destiny. Since Wu-ming's side was considered to have gone against the will of the heavens, then wouldn't Ramses II's side also be considered to have gone against the will of the heavens? That was very likely. Wu-ming recalled some details about Ramses II. When Ramses II and Wu-ming were talking, Ramses II had been holding his head, and his neck gave Wu-ming a feeling that something was wrong. He did not think much of it first, but now that he thought about it, Wu-ming felt that something was wrong. Could it be that Ramses II had already been beheaded by the first Hassan, and it was even his head? After seeing the first Hassan's stealth and assassination ability, Wu-ming had no doubt that he could successfully infiltrate Ramses II's temple. The reason why Ramses II was not dead was probably due to the temple's blessing. The lunar residence, in that world, Wu-ming was Wu-ming's temple. Although the size of the temple wasn't large, Wu-ming couldn't be killed if he was inside the temple, just like how Ramses II couldn't be killed in his own temple. With this series of speculations, Wu-ming was now more and more suspicious of Ramses II, wondering if he had also been beheaded by the first Hassan. Ramses II did not die because of the temple, but why was Wu-ming fine after being beheaded by the first Hassan without the temple? Wu-ming's doubts were almost solved. It stood to reason that Wu-ming's spiritual base did not have the instant immunity effect of his root of origin. Even if his arm was cut off from the point of instant death, he would die as long as he touched it. Therefore, Wu-ming should have left by now. But Wu-ming was fine. Wu-ming looked at his severed arm. The severed arm had turned into magic power and dissipated, and the wound on Wu-ming's severed arm had stopped bleeding, but that was not the point. The point was that Wu Ming did not feel any aura of death on his severed arm. Wu Ming could even use magic power to condense a new arm. Let's do it. Wu Ming thought so, and magic power surged at the severed arm. In just a few seconds, a new arm reappeared. Sure enough, looking at his newly grown arm, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was surrounded by shadows. Is it the decision of the restraining power or your own will? Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan. Wu Ming's question was very simple. Did the restraining power give the order to be merciful, or did the first Hassan choose not to let Wu Ming leave? This is the instruction of the evening bell, and also my will. The instruction of the evening bell was definitely the restraining power. That was the difference. Ramses II's head was cut off. Thinking about it, the first Hassan did not use the instant death power when he attacked Ramses II. There were many ways to make a servant leave, such as lack of magic power, master leaving, shattering the heart, spirit core, and head, and so on. Generally speaking, as long as the servant's head was gone, even if the spirit core was intact, they would leave unless they had special abilities. This was the case for Ramses II. The great shrine of Ramses II allowed him to survive after his head was cut off and did not leave. However, this was also thanks to the first Hassan not using the instant death power, which allowed Ramses II to have the opportunity to use the great shrine to extend his life. The first Hassan, who believed in the saying, "Once the sword is out of the scabbard, there is no second sword," did not attack Ramses II again. On the other hand, Wu Ming remembered clearly that the first Hassan's attack was on his body. Because Wu Ming dodged, it led to Wu Ming's arm being cut off. Although cutting off the body was not much better than cutting off the head, one must know that compared to other parts of the body, it was the most difficult place to cut off. After all, the connection point between the arm, head, and other parts of the body was very small, so the first Hassan was actually just cutting off the head. He actually did not expect that Wu Ming could detect his attack and avoid it. Worthy of the name of the legendary dragon. The first Hassan thought so in his heart. On the other hand, Wu Ming was thinking, sure enough, it's good to have someone above you. Wu Ming silently nodded in his heart. In that case, I won't hold you responsible for trying to assassinate me. First Hassan, Wu Ming calmly said. Wu Ming had gotten the upper hand this time. The first Hassan definitely had not snuck in here for a while. If he had attacked Abant and the Sky Wings while Wu Ming was looking for Ramses II, they felt that there was no chance of survival and would have left. According to what the first Hassan had said, it was the first Hassan who had chosen to wait for Wu Ming to arrive before stabbing Wu Ming and letting go of the Sky Wings and Abant. Thinking about it this way, Wu Ming seemed to have to thank the first Hassan. This was too awkward. Even if the first Hassan had given Wu Ming face and only cut him once, having to say thank you after being cut was not something Wu Ming could do. As if seeing Wu Ming's concerns, the first Hassan directly spoke. I will remember in my heart that thou hast saved smoky drunk Hassan. Wu Ming was stunned. This was really a thank you gift. Although this thank you gift was a little too much for Wu Ming to accept. I have one more thing, the first Hassan suddenly said. Chapter 720. The silver arm can't save the white man. You still need to save him. Wu Ming was taken aback, then frowned. White man. Silver arm? There was no doubt that these two were referring to two different people. As for the pure white man, Wu Ming could still guess who it was. It was the pure white Lion King who now occupied the holy city, Artoria Pendragon. It wasn't Wu Ming who thought so. Ramses II also called the Lion King Artoria, who is currently in the holy city that way. But who was the silver arm? Wu Ming didn't remember the silver arm among the people he knew, or was it someone Artoria knew? The people related to Artoria were only those, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and so on. But Wu Ming, as the person who accompanied Artoria for most of her life, was naturally familiar with the people Artoria was familiar with. But none of these people were related to the silver arm. Silver arm. 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 Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. From the information obtained by Wu Ming so far, only 3 Knights of the Round Table did not respond to Artoria's summon. Villo the Ransword, Galahad, and Bedivere. Villo was wombing himself, so it was normal that he couldn't be summoned. Galahad was attached to Matthew, so naturally, he couldn't respond to the summon. Bedivere, who was quite loyal to Artoria, also didn't respond to Artoria's summon, which was undoubtedly a big doubt. And Bedivere had a big characteristic as a Knight of the Round Table. He had a broken arm. Among the Knights of the Round Table, only Bedivere had a relationship with the arm. And when he was in the Uruk Singularity, Wooming once talked with Merlin. Through the conversation, Wooming learned that Merlin was actually very clear about the sixth singularity where Wooming was now. After all, he had clairvoyance. And the fact that Artoria was in this singularity was revealed by Merlin. Otherwise, Wooming wouldn't know that Artoria was here. Still through the conversation, Wooming vaguely learned from Merlin that Merlin was not doing nothing. He had foreshadowed something. As for what the foreshadowing was, unfortunately, Merlin either changed the topic or shook his head mysteriously and refused to say it. Maybe Bedivere was that foreshadowing. But what the truth was, he still had to wait until the truth came out. After ending his inner thoughts, Wooming looked at the first Hassan, who was standing in the same place and leaning on his greatsword like a crutch. The first Hassan came to tell me all this. I will remember it in my heart. I will consider going to the Holy City again. Wooming didn't give up the idea of going to the Holy City to stop Artoria. Because of the oath, Wooming chose to temporarily leave the Holy City and go to the desert to seize the Holy Grail. Fortunately, he met Gadotsi and her party on the way. As a result, his goal of helping Gadotsi repair the singularity as soon as possible was half completed. One was to find Gadotsi, and the other was to complete the goal. The former had been completed, and the latter was almost done. After all, Wooming had already taken the Holy Grail back. After Gadotsi accompanied Matthew to solve Galahad's wish, Wooming would give the Holy Grail to Chaldea and begin to repair the singularity. But after knowing that Artoria seemed to be hiding something from Wooming, coupled with the fact that the first Hassan personally came to remind him, Wooming decided to stay in this singularity for a while. Don't say too much. This is my thanks. The first Hassan responded to Wooming in a brief and simple tone, as if saying goodbye. Then, accompanied by a black fog, the first Hassan disappeared. At the same time, the dark and gloomy feeling in the room also disappeared. The eyes of every skywing species in their room also changed from scarlet eyes of sword runes to golden eyes of sword and shield. All the skywing species calmed down. Abent, who used the entire floating tree as his body, also relaxed. Wooming could clearly feel that Abent's magic power had stabilized a lot. As expected of the Hassan of the Hassans, the assassin of the assassins, with the existence of the crown's spiritual base, Wooming could not help but exclaim. To be honest, just this aura that even Wooming could not detect was enough to show how powerful the first Hassan was. However, if Ramses II were to see this scene, he would probably change his opinion of Wooming. Look at Wooming. He could even vaguely detect the crown assassin and was able to dodge the opponent's attack. Although he did not dodge, at least he moved. Unlike him, he did not even know that his head had been chopped off. If not for the first Hassan showing himself at the end, Ramses II probably would not have known who had attacked him. If not for the fact that Wooming had met Ramses II and had a little understanding of him, Wooming might have attributed Ramses' obedience to fear after being cut by the first Hassan. However, it was precisely because Wooming had met Ramses II and understood his character that he did not think so. How could a guy like Gilgamesh know how to write the word fear? This king-like courage was what Wooming appreciated. Just as Wooming was thinking about whether to immediately go to the holy city, the first Hassan's voice suddenly came from a void. I have cut off thy foreign air, and the armor of refutation shall return. This was undoubtedly the divine ability of the first Hassan. Having seen it before, Wooming was not frightened and instead nodded in understanding. Instead, it was the skywing species and Abant who were startled by the sudden turn of events from the first Hassan and collectively entered battle mode. This made them smile helplessly and gratifyingly. They were indeed no match for the first Hassan, but for the safety of their master, they would still stand up. The loyalty of the skywing species was vividly displayed. Previously, when Wu Ming's arm was cut off by the first Hassan, almost all the skywings woke up from their standby slumber and rushed toward Wu Ming. The reason it was almost was because Jillian did not come. Logically speaking, although Jillian would definitely be the first to come in such a situation, there was no sign of Jillian this time. In truth, it was mainly because Jillian was still in a deep slumber and recovering from the previous incident. It was similar to a protective device in a human body. Jillian was severely lacking in magic power and was recovering, so she might not be able to wake up even if she wanted to. It was the same principle as how humans would fall into a coma after losing large amounts of blood. Not bothering with Jillian, Wu Ming walked out of the room. Now that all the skywings were awake, he had to go and comfort them so they could sleep. Otherwise, even if they were in a non-combat state, Wu Ming was afraid that their berserk state would devour their rationality. However, when he thought about the number of skywings, Wu Ming felt his stomach ache. I'll just treat it as training. Chapter 721. The skywings had fallen asleep, but it was not Wu Ming who pacified them one by one. After all, this was Abanthi's body, and with Abanthi's help, Wu Ming had successfully experienced what it was like to be a leader. Abanthi sent a collective message to the skywings to pacify them. However, this time, the skywings were more like sleep than standby. Because it was Wu Ming who had personally gone to comfort the skywings, he had asked them to lie down on the bed like ordinary girls instead of floating in the air and waiting for an opportunity. Although the skywings did not quite understand this behavior, it was still an order from their master, so they still obeyed. Lying on the bed, the skywings entered a standby state, but to an outsider, they really did look like they were asleep. Back in the monitoring room, Wu Ming sat on the sofa and browsed through a large magic screen in front of him. The screen displayed the basic data of the skywings. Although Abanthi did not really have modern technological knowledge, its magical knowledge was pretty good. Thus, it displayed the basic data of the skywings in the form of a magic screen to Wu Ming. Although as the master of these tens of thousands of skywings, Wu Ming could see the information of their servants, Wu Ming could not look at every skywing one by one. With the idea of slacking off when the skywings were summoned, Wu Ming only looked at their ranks. The information that Abanthi had prepared for Wu Ming was a great help to Wu Ming. Because the information of ordinary skywing ray servants was the same, Abent collected the information of those skywing ray servants into a sample and took it out. Unless it was a skywing with a special skill, the information would not be listed separately. Thus, the screen in front of Wu Ming only had the information of a few servants. After browsing for some time, Wu Ming turned off the virtual screen in front of him and leaned back on the sofa. He crossed one hand and rubbed his forehead with the other. Sure enough, Berserker Spirit Base has too much of an effect on the skywings. According to the information provided by Abanthi, the skywings summoned by Berserker had an EX Berserker rank. What did an EX Berserker mean? Either they were crazy to the extreme and could communicate with others, or they could not communicate at all, not even with their master. One was the extreme of the positive side, and the other was the extreme of the negative side. It was clear that the skywings had the extreme of the negative side. To put it simply, if the battle went on for a little longer, the skywings might not be able to control themselves, just like Gopral. There was even a high chance that they would break from their master's control, which meant that they might break free from Wu Ming's control or not listen to him. As a result, the skywing species became expendable, because once they were used, they would lose control. This was something Wu Ming didn't want to see. Fortunately, Azrael was different from the other skywings. As the commander of the skywings, Azrael had the ability to resist berserk. Thus, Wu Ming did not have to worry that Azrael would go berserk over at Gadatsi's place. However, the other skywings were not so lucky. According to the information provided by the servants, the skywings that had gone berserk were of little value. In that case, the skywings can't move freely, Wu Ming muttered to himself. However, as the original individual, Azrael and the foreign individual, Gopril, could still move. Azrael had a special skill, which allowed her to move freely. As for Gopril, Wuming decided that once she woke up, he would have her follow him. With Wuming by his side, Wuming did not feel that Gopril would go out of control. Wuming could stop Gopril the moment he saw her lose her rationality. In the worst-case scenario, he could use Annihilation Lock to restrain her again. The reason why he did not bring the other Skywings was that Gopril also had a special skill. As the strongest foreign individual, Gopril had a skill that greatly strengthened her damage. In other words, Gopril's Sky Strike was much stronger than the other Sky Strikes of the other Skywings in terms of explosion range, power, and release speed. In fact, because of the skill, Gopril's mana consumption was much lower than the other Skywings. Facing an existence like Gopril, Wuming had no reason not to bring her along. This reason also explained why Wuming had chosen to have Gopril follow him. It was not because she was a foreign individual and had special privileges, but because she had a special skill. Because she was a foreign individual, she was powerful. And because she was powerful, her character was also extraordinary. It was precisely because of her extraordinary character that she had a special skill that was different from the other Skywings. Servants were the clones of heroic spirits, and heroic spirits were a kind of spiritual existence that was a combination of the human spirit and historical legends. This meant that the abilities of heroic spirits did not only rely on their own abilities, but also their inheritance. For example, take a servant that Wuming had once met, the Assyrian Empress Semiramis. The noble phantasm she used in Tulifas was the Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble phantasm that was sublimated from the essence of the Hanging Garden, a miracle building that had disappeared. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was not actually created by Semiramis. Its actual creator was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. It was precisely because of this that it was called the Hanging Garden of Babylon. It could be said that the Hanging Garden of Babylon had nothing to do with her, but because it was rumored in later generations that she had created the Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, was combined with Semiramis. The Vain Garden of Babylon, Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble artifact, came into being. The Skywings had not died, were not humans, and had no connection with the human spirit, but they had legends. Just like how Wuming had left behind legends in history and obtained a different identity as a servant, the Skywings also had stories in other worlds. Since they had stories, they naturally had the possibility of becoming heroic spirits. And Wuming had cheated by summoning the Skywings. So, some of their skills or noble artifacts would naturally change because of what they had done in their own world. Azrael and Gopril were examples. Since that's the case, I'll just use the other Skywings as my trump cards. After that, Wuming put down the hand that was rubbing his eyebrows and opened his eyes. Immediately after, Wuming casually waved his hand, and golden ripples spread out around Wuming. A silver-white chain with a dark purple aura extended out of the golden ripples. Chapter 722. This was the chain that Wuming had used to subdue the Berserk Gopril. Its name was Annihilation Lock. Wuming looked at the chain that resembled a heaven lock, but was no longer a heaven lock. His heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. Wuming stroked the Annihilation Lock, and the Annihilation Lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Because of Wuming's touch, it flickered with a faint purple light. I didn't expect you to turn a fake into a real noble artifact. That's right. The Annihilation Lock in Wuming's hand had already become a noble artifact. It was not wrong to call it a noble artifact. Wuming had added his own authority to the chain. Although it was a weakened authority, the authority of a god was still not to be underestimated. When Wuming sent Gopril back, he discovered that the pseudo-heaven lock, which had absorbed one of Wuming's weakened authority, had been upgraded to the Annihilation Lock, which was a noble artifact. The Annihilation Lock was no longer a fake that would dissipate due to the evaporation of magic power. Instead, it had become a genuine noble artifact that would not wear out even after 1,000 years. The danger of this singularity is beyond my expectations, Wu Ming said calmly. To find help, Wu Ming had used his dependent incarnation. As there was no effective way to subdue Gopril, Wu Ming had deposited the authority of the Annihilation incarnation into the pseudo-heavenlock, so that the chain that he had casually created could bind the berserk Gopril. And just now, Wu Ming had also used his giant incarnation. As for when he used it, it was when Wu Ming had punched the first Hassan. At that time, Wu Ming defined the first Hassan as an enemy, and an enemy who had cut off on his arms. Wu Ming did not dare to be careless. Therefore, Wu Ming directly used Giant Incarnation, gathered the power of Giant into his fist, and punched at First Hassan. However, Wu Ming was surprised that First Hassan's shield was able to block his attack, as expected of a crowned servant. Even though the assassin class was generally considered the weakest among the 7 classes, the assassin class was not inferior to the saber class, which was generally considered to be the best class. The other saber servants were slightly inferior to the first Hassan. However, Wu Ming was not weak either. The Giant Incarnation's attack directly shattered the first Hassan's shield. That was the weapon of a crowned servant, and it was not something that could be broken by just anyone. Just like the first Hassan's simple and unadorned greatsword that looked a little damaged and had become unsharp, and the cloak behind the first Hassan that looked like a ragged cloth. Both of them were not as weak as they looked on the surface. The greatsword that was constantly infused with the faith of the first Hassan had reached a level where it was undamaged, and it even had an instant death effect. The broken cloak was also quite powerful. Not only could it set off a sandstorm that was enough to cover the sun, but it also had a powerful defensive ability that was not weaker than the first Hassan's shield. Therefore, Wu Ming was able to break the first Hassan's shield. After all, in Wu Ming's opinion, the body of a servant was still too weak, unless he could also have a crowned spiritual base. However, the crowned spiritual base was created by suppression. Wu Ming did not need to submit to someone who was destined to be weaker than him, even if the other party was good to him. Anyway, when Wu Ming found his body, Wu Ming did not need to be a yes man anymore. If everything went well, maybe after solving this singularity, Wu Ming could find his body before Gadatsi and others went to Uruk. Then, he could directly solve the singularity of Uruk and kill Gidia. He had already seen Gidia's means, and he also forced the other party to detonate the black mud on the outer layer of each world to choose to severely injure Wu Ming. Gidia must have also been injured, otherwise he would not let Wu Ming mess around in this singularity. Gidia, who also saw Wu Ming's power, was really vigilant against Wu Ming. Since Wu Ming had already done so many things in the singularity and no one stopped him, it was obvious that Gidia did not pay attention to this singularity. In Gidia's view, even with the help of Wu Ming, Chaldea could repair these burned residues, and it would have no impact on the result. To be more ruthless, even if the burn of humanity was rewritten and the burn of humanity was successfully restored by Chaldea, it would have no impact on Gidia. The reason was very clear to Wu Ming, because Gidia's vision or ambition was no longer here. Gidia, who had come into contact with the black mud, had long changed his target to other worlds, a wider sea of stars. Although Wu Ming did not know what Gidia's original purpose was, Wu Ming knew that Gidia's purpose had changed from the original goal to go into other worlds. This was like a person's original plan was to take a rocket to the moon that was suitable for him. But before taking off, he found a more habitable planet, Mars. Then, using the existing fuel, changing the route, and going to Mars wasn't impossible, right? As for the residues of the fuel, at this point, that kind of thing was no longer necessary for that person to pay attention to. But for Gidia, Wu Ming, this bomb still needed to be paid attention to. And for Wu Ming, this hidden danger, Gidia, also needed to be paid attention to. Although Wu Ming was confident that the next time he fought with Gidia, Gidia might also have the same confidence. After all, both sides understood each other after fighting once, so Gidia might also have a way to deal with Wu Ming. But that was all in the future. From the current situation, Wu Ming and Gidia wouldn't meet for a while, and Wu Ming didn't have to worry about Gidia coming out to cause trouble. Closing his eyes, Wu Ming went deep into his inner world. A huge stone plate appeared in Wu Ming's heart. There were 12 small stone plates on the large stone plate. The small stone plates were placed in the 12 o'clock direction like a scale, and 3 small stone plates were in a completely dim, petrified grayish-white state. They were the giant incarnation at 2 o'clock, the annihilation incarnation at 5 o'clock, and the dependent incarnation at 8 o'clock. These 3 incarnations had been used by Wu Ming, and Wu Ming could only use the remaining 9 incarnations. But Wu Ming didn't regret it. After all, good steel should be used on the blade. After that, Wu Ming left the inner world and opened his eyes. The next thing he needed to think about was Artoria. Chapter 723. Whether it was from Ramses II or the first Hassan, Wu Ming learned one thing. That was, Artoria's change was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be more to it than meets the eye. And according to the first Hassan's words of, "I need thy rescue," Artoria's current state was not good. Although Wu Ming seemed to have a conflict with Artoria, Wu Ming could not sit still once something related to Artoria appeared. The feelings that he had gained from being with her for most of his life were not something that could be abandoned just because of a quarrel. If anyone thought that this feeling could be easily abandoned, then they had underestimated the bond between Wu Ming and Artoria. If I have a conflict with her and bully her until she cries, that's fine. But if you bully her until she cries, then I'm sorry, but you're done for. You'll die a horrible death, the kind that doesn't even leave behind a trace. Artoria was that she, and Wu Ming was that I. When it came to Artoria, Wu Ming would never give in, not even half a step. Wu Ming estimated that this matter might not have much to do with the Magus King, but the singularity was indeed caused by the Magus King in the beginning. And Wu Ming could not find trouble with the Magus King at the moment, so he could only take the right approach. Calculating the time, Tachika and the others should have arrived at the Holy City by now, Wu Ming thought. He decided to go to the Holy City first to meet up with Gadatsi and the others. But right now, Gapril, who was in a coma, had yet to wake up. Wu Ming did not dare to let her move freely, and restricting her movements was not appropriate either. So Wu Ming decided to wait until Gapril woke up. Of course, Wu Ming could also choose to heal Gapril and take the initiative to wake her up. But because Wu Ming wanted to punish Gapril, he chose to let her recover on her own. However, things were different now. Wu Ming had to hurry. With that in mind, Wu Ming stood up from the sofa and walked out of the room. Abbott was quite perceptive. He took the initiative to open a door on the wall not far away. If he was not mistaken, that door should be Jillian's room. Thinking so, Wu Ming walked to the front of Gypsy's door and politely knocked on the door. However, how could the unconscious Gapril possibly respond to Wu Ming? Wu Ming knocking on the door was just a mischievous act. After knocking on the door, Wu Ming pushed the door open and entered. His actions were rather smooth, and from this, it could be confirmed that Wu Ming had no intention of entering the room with Gapril's permission. Sometimes pleasure, or bad taste, was just that simple. Wu Ming subconsciously looked around when he entered Gapril's room. A room that looked no different from the other Skywings entered Wu Ming's eyes. The plain walls, the plain bed, and the plain table serve as a foil to the angelic girl's beauty and purity. Gapril was like a sleeping beauty, quietly lying on her simple and unadorned bed. The girl's wings, which were filled with pure white feathers, extended from her back to her front, gently covering her thighs and abdomen like a quilt. The girl's eyes were closed, and her beautiful face was exposed to the air. The girl's hands were crossed and placed above her abdomen and below her chest. Her chest rose and fell as if she was having a sweet dream. Wu Ming, who was immersed in the picture of Sleeping Beauty, sighed. Afterward, Wu Ming walked over to the bed and sat down. She's clearly in the posture of a slender girl, so why is she a combat weapon? Could it be that Artemis has some sort of special fetish? Wu Ming jokingly muttered to himself. Looking at her slender body, no one would have imagined that such a girl could erupt with destructive power. She's beautiful on the outside. If only the hearts of Skywings could be as beautiful as a girl's. Wuming sighed. Beautiful things had a beautiful interior, and this was something that every normal person yearned for. However, the hearts of Skywing girls were not as beautiful as they looked. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were bloodthirsty. They were combat weapons, and they were weapons that were originally created with the goal of killing gods. Moreover, for some reason, Skywing girls had an interest in collecting heads. This meant that Skywing girls were not suited for human life. It was a good thing that Wuming did not require them to completely integrate into human life. Not being able to fight at will was akin to hell for them. Wuming understood the principle that one's temperament had to be changed bit by bit. When things reach an extreme, they could only move in the opposite direction. It was precisely because of this that Wuming had summoned the Skywing girls to help at this particular point. Although he did not know how much time had passed in their world, they must be feeling rather uncomfortable because they could not fight as they wished. In that case, he would let them release some pressure. Not only that, but their arrival could also help Wuming. This was a plan that could kill two birds with one stone. It was a sure win. However, who would have thought that these Skywings would be summoned as berserkers? Their adaptability to the berserker class allowed the Skywing girls to reach the highest level of berserk. Moreover, because it was not a normal summon, this level of berserk gave them a chance to break away from their master's orders. The plan to let the Skywings release the pressure in their hearts had failed because the Skywings were too prone to losing their minds in their current state. The plan to let the Skywings help also failed because the Skywings, who were prone to losing their minds, had no way of helping Wuming. Wuming even wondered if he had hidden his luck. This was simply a case of misfortune never coming singly. Wait a minute. Wuming looked at Gopril's beautiful face and suddenly realized something. If I use Vitality Incarnation, can I suppress Gopril's berserk? Yes, Wuming suddenly thought of his own authority. Since Wuming's Origin Dragon became stronger after the Baptism of Origin, Wuming hardly used Vitality Incarnation. The only time he used it recently was to restore the life of No Name. The reason why he did not use this incarnation was very simple. It was just too useless. Vitality Incarnation could provide Wuming with spring-like vitality. Not only could it recover injuries and mana, but could also resist negative effects such as curses. However, after going through the Origin Baptism, Silent Dragon's recovery ability wasn't weak. Injuries and mana could be recovered quickly, and the Origin Dragon's body was also immune to negative effects. Therefore, Wuming basically did not use Vitality Incarnation. So, since Wuming could not use it, could this incarnation work on a servant who had fallen into berserk? Chapter 724. Although berserk could increase ability value, berserk also had a negative effect on the servant. So, if he injected Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's body, would she be able to avoid the negative effects of berserk? Of course, Wuming did not expect Jillian to enjoy the ability value increase from berserk after she successfully maintained her rationality, as long as her rationality was no longer affected by berserk. Wuming originally wanted to let the primitive Skywings help him, and he did not want to increase their ability value by much. After all, the price of increasing ability value was losing rationality, so it was better not to increase it. With that in mind, Wuming grabbed Jillian's soft body and closed his eyes. Wuming began to try to give the authority of Vitality Incarnation to Jillian. After all, Wuming had never tried to give authority to a servant. The situation when Wuming used Dependent Incarnation, Annihilation Incarnation, and Giant Incarnation was completely different from the current situation. When Wuming used the Dependent Incarnation, he used the power of the Dependent as a medium like a holy relic into the summoning circle. When Wuming used the Annihilation Incarnation, he added the power of Annihilation into the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock. When he used the Giant's power, he simply used it. Now, Wu-Ming needed to instill the authority of Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's spirit base in an attempt to change the berserk effect of Jillian's berserker class. Wu-Ming had experienced using his authority on a servant, but Wu-Ming had never experienced using authority on a servant. Because he did not have any experience, Wu-Ming could only fumble around on his own. Specks of phosphorescent magic power danced around Wu-Ming's body, and the magic power seemed to have a life of its own as it surrounded Jillian. Then, Wu-Ming began to chant, "The one with the supreme divine power of the guardian, the protection of the god, the abomination of the devil. Nothing can get close to her," surging like a fountain of vitality. As she chanted, the surrounding phosphorescent light shone brightly. The originally star-like mana turned into a mass of mana, dancing around Jillian. That was Wu-Ming's authority, the embodiment of Wu-Ming's vitality. Grant the world equal protection. The moment the last sentence was chanted, the manosphere representing Wu-Ming's vitality incarnation instantly fused with Gopril's body. A faint radiance was emitted from Jillian's body, and Wu-Ming, who was holding Jillian's hand, could clearly feel that Jillian's mana was rapidly recovering. This meant that success. There was no surprise, no joy, as if it was a matter of course. Wu-Ming said indifferently, no matter what, it was still Wu-Ming's own authority. If he couldn't control it himself, then who could he count on? For Wu-Ming, it was unexpected but reasonable. Along with the rapid recovery of her mana, Jillian, who was lying on the bed, slowly opened her eyes. Jillian spoke subconsciously, somewhat puzzled. Although Jillian gave off a sleepy feeling, Wu-Ming knew that this was the aftereffect of Jillian's madness. "How do you feel, Jillian?" Wu-Ming asked with concern. Master." Jillian, who heard Wu-Ming's words, was obviously shocked. After coming back to her senses, Jillian saw Wu-Ming holding her hand and looking at her with a face full of concern. She responded shyly to Wu-Ming. Master is really concerned about me. Could it be that Master wants to do something perverted to me? If it's Master, sure." Jillian's answer instantly made Wu-Ming raise his brows. Then, Wu-Ming silently raised his fist. Bang! After a short while, Wu-Ming sat on Jillian's bed with his legs crossed, while Jillian stood in front of Wu-Ming with a smile on her face. It seemed that there was no problem at all. Of course, that was if one ignored the bump on Jillian's head. "What do you feel, Jillian?" Wu-Ming crossed his arms and repeated his previous question. Jillian, who had learned her lesson, naturally didn't tease Wu-Ming anymore. Instead, she began to answer seriously. "Yes, although I don't know what happened, my body seems to have endless energy." Jillian wasn't an idiot. Instead, she was quite smart. Naturally, Jillian remembered what had happened before she lost consciousness. Combined with her own berserk EX, Jillian naturally deduced that she had lost her rationality and went berserk because of that skill. Although Wu-Ming didn't say it explicitly, the reason why she could wake up without any discomfort was probably related to her master. "You don't have the urge to kill like crazy anymore?" Wu-Ming asked. Jillian shook her head and said helplessly and playfully, "I'm a Skywing after all. Of course, I still want to kill." Wu-Ming glared at Jillian, and she immediately became obedient. "But the feeling of wanting to kill can be controlled, just like in my original world." Jillian touched the bump on her head with some lingering fear. Her master's beating really hurt. Afterward, Jillian propped up her other arm with one hand, and the arm that was propped up extended a finger to her chin as she spoke again, puzzled. "Not only that, I realize that compared to before, I'm calmer, as if the urge has been eliminated, right?" Wu-Ming answered for Jillian in advance. "Yes, that's right. That's it. Not only that, even if I'm angry, I can only feel it a little. My anger seems to have been soothed by something." Gil Lyre sighed. This feeling was a little uncomfortable for her. It was like having a hot-tempered friend, but one day he suddenly became not hot-tempered, and he became very calm. Not to mention the people who knew him. Even he himself was surprised and uncomfortable with his current personality. However, Jillian's answer made Wu-Ming close his eyes and nod. It seems that the authority is in effect. Because the effect of vitality incarnation was still active, whenever Jillian had negative emotions such as rage and killing, vitality incarnation would purify them. But after all, it was a weakened version of authority incarnation, and it didn't affect Wooming himself, so it might not work completely on Jillian. However, there was one thing that was certain: Jillian would no longer be affected by Berserk. Chapter 725. Wu Ming told Jillian what he had done to Jillian. Then, Jillian knelt down on one knee in shock. Lord Wu Ming, please forgive me for being blunt, but your gift is too precious. After knowing that Wu Ming had bestowed her with God's authority by slaying a god, she immediately became very serious. Although Gopril usually looked very playful, that was just her appearance. Every Skywing was serious and bloodthirsty, and Gopril was no exception. Once something serious happened, Gopril would become serious, just like now. Even Gopril's address for Wu Ming changed from Master to Lord Wu Ming, because she became serious. Is that what you think, Gopril? Wu Ming smiled helplessly and shook his head. But I think it's a good deal. A dispensable authority incarnation in exchange for a rational helper. No matter how Wu Ming thought about it, he was the one who profited. Lord Wu Ming, I can feel the power of authority in my body. Gopril looked into Wu Ming's eyes. Even if I've been emitting magic power, the magic power in my body hasn't decreased in the slightest, and it's still full. That was the effect of the authority Wu Ming bestowed on Gopril. Not only that, but I also feel the surging vitality in my body all the time, as if it's about to break out of my body. That was naturally the effect of vitality incarnation. The endless vitality could quickly replenish and heal injuries. Gopril estimated that even if she was seriously injured, she would not need to go to the repair device to recover. In just a few minutes, the serious injury would disappear, and she would recover to her peak strength. Through these visible effects, Gopril also understood how powerful this power was. It was too wasteful to give such power to her. If Wu Ming kept it, it could be used as a trump card. Therefore, this subordinate believes that for such a precious authority, you should keep it instead of giving it to this subordinate. I don't agree with you, Gopril. Wu Ming gave Gopril a negative opinion. It's a real waste not to use the authority because it's precious and you're afraid of wasting it. Wu Ming's words made Gopril stunned, but it was not without reason. Even if something was precious, it had a use. If you chose not to use it because it was precious and kept it for safekeeping, then that item would definitely be shamed. Just like money, no matter how much money you earned, if you didn't use it, you would still be a pile of dirt after you died. To put it simply, Wu Ming was a person who believed in making the best use of everything. He would not use something because it was too precious. Of course, this was not to say that Wu Ming was a fool. Since Wu Ming chose to use it, there would naturally be benefits to be gained. Letting Gopril regain her consciousness was undoubtedly beneficial to Wu Ming's current situation. Compared to Wu Ming not knowing if he could use the vitality incarnation, it was better to give it to Gopril. Having decided to use the other Skywings as Joker cards, Wu Ming did not choose to use the vitality incarnation on them, and instead used it on Gopril alone. Apart from this, Wu Ming could not guarantee that the vitality incarnation on the Skywings would be able to suppress Berserk transformation. Therefore, using it on the strongest Skywing life form, Gopril was the best decision. After all, the saying quality, not quantity, made sense. So, Gopril, if you feel afraid and guilty about having the authority of a god, then do your best to fight for me. What would he do if he felt guilty? He just had to make it seem like he deserved it. The best way was to make military contributions. Wu Ming's words made Gopril's eyes light up. Gopril instantly perked up and replied to Wu Ming with a victorious smile. Yes, the Skywing alien Giliel is determined to sweep away all the enemies in your path for you, my lord. Victory for you. At this moment, Gopril seemed to have found her purpose in that war that had lasted for who knew how long. For my lord's victory, I won't hesitate to die. Get ready, Gopril. We'll go to the holy city in a moment, Wu Ming said and walked toward the door. He did not forget that this was Gopril's room. Yes. Hearing Gopril's response, Wu Ming pushed the door open and went out. After closing the door, Wu Ming let out a long sigh of relief. Gopril is really giving me a headache, Wu Ming said as he walked toward the surveillance room that Aban had opened for him. But it's better to have a headache than to have no one to deal with her, Wu Ming said and walked into the surveillance room. Wu Ming sat on the familiar sofa and looked at the virtual surveillance screen in front of him. Wu Ming shouted to Abant, "Abant, can you turn on the surveillance around you?" There were no words, only the changes on the virtual screen in front of Wu Ming. The virtual screen no longer showed the sky wings, but the barren land and withered branches that had lost all life, as well as the clear sky with a large halo. There is no doubt that Abant was like a moving fortress in the sky, turning on the surveillance of his surroundings. Very good. Then, let's go, Abant. Wu Ming nodded, then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa! In an instant, a huge black-purple ripple appeared in front of Abanheim. It was Wu Ming's teleportation skill, and on the other side of the teleportation gate was the holy city that Wu Ming had been to before. The black-purple ripple kept wriggling as if it was the gate of hell. This was originally the special effect of the teleportation gate. It did not look like much when it was the height of a person, but after it was played out, it was a little nauseating. Anyway, Wu Ming felt that it was a little strange, so it was better to leave quickly. Let's go, Abant. After Wu Ming said that, Abant moved. Although Wu Ming did not feel any signs of movement, through the surveillance that Abant gave to Wu Ming, he could see that Abant was gradually entering the teleportation gate that Wu Ming had opened. In just a moment, Abant was completely submerged in the black-purple ripple. As if he had received a notification, the black-purple ripple instantly closed. Abanheim's departure did not leave any trace. The barren land was still the same barren land, and the large halo in the sky was still the same blue sky. Only this singularity was still collapsing. Chapter 726. The pure white city walls stood on the plains, surrounding the last pure land on this land. The current holy city was called Camelot. It was a holy city with chalk walls. It was built on these ruins. A large group of refugees surrounded the gate of the holy city. They looked up at the holy city from time to time, but after a few glances, they quickly lowered their heads, as if they would tarnish the holy city if they looked too much. The refugees knew that this place was originally a religious holy land, the holy city of Jerusalem. Later, it was occupied by the Lionheart King, Charlie I. However, Charlie I was not a wise king. To say that he was a tyrant was an understatement. He was simply a demon. But fortunately, the cruel and heartless Lionheart King was defeated by the new Lion King. Although the Lionheart King was defeated, almost all the people were displaced because of the war. In order to provide shelter for the people, after the Lion King defeated the Lionheart King, the new holy city was built at an extremely fast speed. This made the people who heard the news very excited. But the truth was beyond their expectations. The Lion King did not open the city to accept the refugees. Instead, he closed the city gate and did not allow the refugees to enter at will. Moreover, he also ordered that the holy city would hold a holy selection every once in a while. As long as they passed the holy selection, they could enter the holy city and start a new life. However, the refugees who had suffered a lot did not want to wait any longer. So, the first bird came out. Defeating the evil Lionheart King made the Lion King on the side of justice in the eyes of the people. The Lion King was benevolent. This was something that many people believed at that time, and even now. However, there were always some people who were not honest. People were divided into good and evil. The good people waited for the holy selection to proceed, while the evil people raised the flag of rebellion. They formed a rebellion army and launched an attack on the holy city. However, how could these so-called rebels be a match for the Lion King who defeated the Lionheart King? In the eyes of outsiders, the rebel army was instantly defeated without any surprise. However, the Lion King forgave them and let them participate in the holy selection. What a benevolent king. These refugees, who only knew how to express themselves, thought so. However, the problem was that since it was a selection, there must be people who failed. However, this was something that no one noticed. Where did all the people who failed the selection go? The refugees only thought that those people had entered the holy city to live and didn't think too much about it. Even the rebel army that wanted to rebel against the Lion King had the qualifications to enter the holy city. How easy was it for this king to be selected? No, it should be said that this Lion King was very benevolent. In this way, the people who had been displaced by the war would naturally rush here spontaneously after hearing the news. More and more refugees rushed over and entered the holy city. The number of refugees in the wilderness dwindled. The newly arrived refugees did not consider whether the sacred city could accommodate such a large number of refugees. Or rather, they were subconsciously deceiving themselves. Everything was for the sake of survival. Although there were many dangers in the wilderness of this era, due to the changes in the singularity, there were still many refugees who insisted on coming. As long as there was a glimmer of hope to survive in a safe place, people who yearned for a safe environment would not give up. At this moment, the refugees at the entrance of the holy city were the ones who had just arrived. According to the solemn night patrolling around the holy city, the frequency of saint selection had increased. Now, there would be a saint selection every few days. This undoubtedly made the refugees very excited, because they would be safe soon. There would be no more danger and no more harm. According to the solemn night, a group of refugees had been bewitched by the mountain people in the northern mountains and the emissaries of the new powers in the west. They had escaped the holy city selection. How foolish! Every refugee who gathered at the entrance of the holy city for the saint selection thought so. Giving up a good life in the holy city and running to live with the mountain people, were they blinded by faith? However, it seemed that one of the leaders of the mountain people had been killed by the holy city's gatekeepers and the guerrilla knights. It could be considered a lesson for those people. However, this had nothing to do with them. Soon, they would be able to enter the holy city and live a happy life. As if responding to the inner thoughts of the refugees, the gates of the holy city opened. Generally speaking, the patrolling knights around the holy city would not enter or leave the holy city. They had their own strongholds around the holy city. In other words, the opening of the holy city's gates meant that the saint selection was about to take place. Immediately after, the sound of steel armor stepping on the ground came from the holy city's gates. Then, the sound of uniform footsteps, exuding a surging aura, entered the ears of the refugees. All the refugees stood up excitedly and looked at the holy city's gatekeeper, Sir Gawain, who was leading the solemn knights to conduct the saint selection. Without the slightest change, the knights of solemnity surrounded the refugees as if they were preparing for a ceremony. Gawain walked into the encirclement of the solemn knights. He was about to begin the saint selection as usual. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion among the refugees. Gawain frowned. Could it be that someone would appear this time to stop the saint selection? Could it be the master of Chaldea, who represents the new power, or is it Hassan again? Gawain shook his head. After the saint selection refugees' escape a few days ago, Gawain had brought enough manpower this time. If he still wanted to save the refugees with just a few servants, it would not be so easy. However, I still have to be wary of that winged guy, Gawain muttered to himself. As the representative of the new power, Chaldea's master was indeed not powerful enough. However, Berserker, who had wings like an angel, made Gawain take it a little seriously. As expected of the holy spear that could withstand the holy spear that the king released when he woke up, the people of that new power are indeed very strong. If it were not for the problem of leaving, Gawain would have been more than happy to go all out and have a good fight with that angel. Gawain shook his head. The most important thing now was to proceed with the saint selection smoothly. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain himself to Gawain. Silence! Gawain shouted, and the restless crowd calmed down. However, they all looked at the sky behind them. Gawain was taken aback, then realized something. The holy city was behind him. Could it be that the enemy had launched an air attack? Gawain turned his head and looked at the sky. What he saw made his pupils shrink. For some reason, a huge purplish-black ripple suddenly appeared high in the sky. However, that was not the main point. The main point was the thing that appeared from the purplish-black ripple. It was a huge floating tree. Chapter 7:27. It was not that Gawain had never dealt with enemies in the sky before, but the enemy in the sky that appeared in front of Gawain really shocked him. The height of the floating tree was far from the ground and did not cover the ground in the slightest. The holy city was not covered by the floating tree in the slightest. However, this did not mean that the floating tree in the sky was small. On the contrary, Gawain felt that the floating tree was quite big. Based on Gawain's eyesight and his experience, the floating tree that appeared in the sky was quite large. In any case, it was definitely not smaller than the holy city behind him. The reason why the holy city was not covered by the shadow of the floating tree that appeared in the sky above the holy city was entirely because the new floating tree was too tall. Could it be the new force that appeared? Gawain frowned. When he fought with the angel not long ago, the angel revealed some things. Because it was just a hurried fight, the angel did not announce its name and the name of the force. However, Gawain felt that the new floating tree was related to the angel. Judging from the evidence, the two were indeed closely related. The angel had wings, and the floating tree was extremely high in the sky. Other than flying, Gawain did not know any other way to enter the floating tree. Therefore, this floating tree, which looked like a castle in the sky, should belong to the new force that had appeared. Whether the other party was here to fight or to negotiate, for Gawain, who was guarding the gate of the holy city, there was only one thing he needed to do. Stop the holy selection. Everyone on alert. Gawain immediately ordered the Knights of Solemnity. Yes, the Knights of Solemnity responded to Gawain in unison. However, even if they were to fight, these Knights of Solemnity would probably not be of much use. Gawain thought so. After all, only servants could resist other servants, not to mention that the Knights of the Round Table had first-class servants. These Knights of Solemnity could only be used to clean up those who were not chosen. Although this was the truth, Gawain could not say it out loud. Without saying anything more, Gawain turned around and walked toward the interior of the holy city. The Knights of Solemnity also neatly changed their formation. From the original encirclement of the refugees, they lined up around the holy city. As a result, the refugees began to panic and lose their heads out of fear. The reason was simple. They did not know the background of the giant tree that appeared in the sky, nor did they know whether it was an ally or an enemy. However, the refugees knew one thing. If a fight were to break out, they would definitely be the first to suffer. Rise, the people suffer. Fall, the people suffer. This saying not only applied to the place where this saying originated, but also to any region or any region with royal authority. Gawain didn't seem to have any intention of caring about these refugees. Instead, he immediately entered the holy city. The solemn knights ignored the refugees. Thus, the refugees knew their fate. He was just a dispensable weakling. However, they had no choice. Before the Lion King was a kind person, he was still a king. It was impossible for them to vent their anger on the sacred city. Therefore, the refugees could only vent their frustrations on the floating trees that appeared in the sky. However, the solemn atmosphere at the gate of the holy city made it so that they did not dare to shout and curse. They could only express their dissatisfaction with the floating trees in their hearts. Inside the floating trees, or rather inside a bond, Wooming sat in the monitoring room, silently watching the image of the holy city below. I didn't expect Abant's image to be so clear. Although he did not know how far Abant was from the ground, Wooming knew that it was definitely not close. However, The image that Abant provided was at its largest, so detailed that it could reach the hair of the refugees that had fallen to the ground. Thus, using magic to reach the level of science did not make sense. Master, I'm ready." At this moment, Giliel's voice came from outside the room. Giliel very consciously did not open the door and directly floated in through the wall. The ability of the Skywings to pass through walls made Wuming feel rather helpless. She clearly had the ability of an assassin, so why did she become a berserker? "Then, Master, what do you need me to do? Do you want me to cast Sky Strike?" Giliel asked as she floated around Wuming. "There's no need for that. Besides, even if it's you, I'm afraid you won't be able to cause any damage to the Holy City." Wuming did not ridicule Giliel for wanting to cast Sky Strike right from the start. He shook his head rather seriously. "See here." Wuming then zoomed in on the map on the magic screen, shifted his position, and used his finger to point at the interior of the Holy City. As Abant was high above the Holy City, logically speaking, from the image that Abant provided, he should be able to see the entire interior of the Holy City. "But I can't see the interior?" Giliel was slightly surprised. Yes, from the image directly above, one could not see, or rather, could not clearly see the interior of the Holy City. The Holy City below was clearly just a city, but in the image, the interior of the Holy City was filled with a mosaic-like light film. The light blocked the view of the interior, and from the ground, due to the height of the Holy City's walls, it was still impossible to see the interior. This should be the defense formed by Artoria's Holy Spear. Not only can it defend against aerial attacks, it can also block detection, Wuming explained to Giliel. "Artoria? Master sounds so familiar. Could it be that he's someone Mostet knows?" Giliel teased Wuming in an ambiguous tone, as if she could tell that Wuming had special feelings for that Artoria. Bang! Ouch! Giliel hugged her head and floated around in the control room, trying to relieve the pain. Wuming silently put down his fist, and without even looking at Giliel, he got down to business. "Abant, can you detect Azrael's magic power?" Wuming, who could not see the interior of the Holy City, could not determine whether Azrael and Gadatsi had entered the Holy City, so Wuming wanted Abant to detect Azrael's magic power. As someone who was familiar with Azrael, Abant must have a way. Abant did not respond, but a progress bar appeared on the big screen. The progress bar ended, and the map of the Holy City, including the surroundings of the Holy City, reappeared before Wuming. On this map, the location of the city gate and the north were marked with blue marks. It was Azrael's magic power that Abanti had detected, and Abanti had presented it to nothingness as a blue mark. It seemed that Azrael had gone to the north. However, this was not the only thing Wuming was concerned about. This is the trace of a battle. Chapter 728. Wasn't it obvious? Wuming ordered Azrael to secretly follow Gadatsi and the others. She would not appear unless it was absolutely necessary. However, Abin detected a lot of Azrael's magic power. Wasn't it obvious that Azrael had fought? And Wuming felt that the magic power left behind was more like a mark left by Azrael than a trace of a battle. It was normal for a servant to leave behind magic power from a battle. Therefore, Gawain did not deliberately remove the residual magic power, and Gawain's inaction left Azrael's mark behind. The magic power left by Azrael extended all the way to the north. In other words, Gadatsi and the others retreated to the north. Could it be that Tachika and the others just happened to encounter the Saint-Elect? Wuming guessed. As the emissary who wanted to see the Lion King, Gadatsi and the others would not have a conflict for no reason. And the only thing that could make Gadatsi and the others have a conflict with the Holy City was this Saint-Elect. After all, Artoria was not an unreasonable person. Even if she was deified by the Holy Lance and became the goddess Lungaminiad, if Gadatsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would most likely agree. Even if it was because of Chaldea's action of saving the 5 singularities, when Gadatsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would agree to see them. Wuming estimated that when Gadatsi and the others came here, the saint-elect happened to be at the gate of the holy city. Gadotsi and the others could not bear to see the refugees who were not selected to be slaughtered, so they intervened to stop this saint-elect from going on. However, it was not correct to say that they stopped it. It should be said that they obstructed it, because Gadotsi and the others did not have the strength to fight against Gawain. Not to mention Da Vinci, in the face of the Knights of the Round Table, the immature Matthew could only protect his master, and Azrael was also ordered by Wu Ming to not show up easily. And their opponent, Gawain, the gatekeeper of the holy city, Wu Ming guessed that he must have received the blessing from the Lion King, just like Tristan. However, even if Gawain did not receive the blessing, Gadotsi and the others could not deal with him. And with Wu Ming's understanding of Gadotsi, after seeing the refugees being slaughtered, she would definitely intervene. She knew that it was impossible, but as long as it was the right thing to do, she would still do it. This was the spirit of the last master of Chaldea, Fujimaru Rika. It was this precious spirit that made all the servants who met Gadotsi were willing to work for her. In fact, to put it simply, Gadotsi had the charisma to attract servants. In this singularity, Wu Ming did not encounter any servants who were alone. So, Wu Ming did not know if there would be anyone other than Azrael to help Gadotsi. Wu Ming would think of the worst-case scenario. Gadotsi was no match for Gawain, and under Azrael's cover, she fled with some of the refugees. As for why they didn't escape with all the refugees, Wu Ming had underestimated Gadotsi. They really didn't have the ability to do so. At most, they could only bring a portion of the refugees away. Even with Azrael, it wouldn't be enough. After all, their number was too small, and it was simply impossible to cover all the refugees. Putting this aside for the time being, Wu Ming had discovered that something was wrong. According to Azrael's remaining battle magic, the direction of escape was the north. Logically speaking, if Gadotsi wanted to escape, she would not escape to the north. After all, Wu Ming was her strongest backing, so she should escape to the west where Wu Ming was. And being forced to retreat to the north did not make sense. With Azrael's cover, Gadotsi was fully capable of moving toward Wu Ming. There was no need for her to go to the unfamiliar north. But Gadotsi still chose to lead the refugees to the north under all kinds of unfavorable circumstances. So, there was only one possibility. Someone suggested that they go to the north. And who was this person? Wu Ming guessed that it was most likely Hassan. It was very likely that Gadotsi and the others came to the holy city to meet the Lion King, but they saw the solemn knight slaughtering the unselected refugees at the end of the holy selection. This made Gadotsi and the others stop them, and it just so happened that Hassan was around. However, Hassan was an assassin and did not have much combat strength. Therefore, under Azrael's cover, Hassan proposed to transfer these refugees to the mountains in the north. That was Hassan's territory, and the villages there were extremely difficult to find, so it was suitable for these refugees. As for why Hassan came to the holy city, it was easy to guess. Hassan had reasons such as wanted to sneak into the holy city to assassinate the Lion King through the holy selection, learn from the refugees rescued by Wu Ming that the holy selection slaughtered the unselected refugees in order to save them, and happened to meet him while collecting information. In short, there were many ways to explain why Hassan appeared here. However, Wu Ming did not know which Hassan met with Gadotsi and the others. However, Wu Ming felt that there was a high possibility that it was the smoke-drunk Hassan whom he saved. Why? It was because she was the one who brought back the refugees who knew the truth about the holy selection. Wu Ming could be sure that there was more than one Hassan on his back, but Wu Ming was not sure if these Hassans could communicate with each other. Even Wu Ming knew that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. In order to avoid the pursuit of the holy city, those Hassans would not have arranged their existences together. If they could not communicate normally, then the Hassan who came here to help Gadotsi and the others was most likely the smoke-drunk Hassan. However, there were exceptions to everything. These were just Wu Ming's guesses. However, one thing was clear. Gadotsi and the others were not in the holy city. Instead, they went to the mountains in the north with Azrael. In this way, There was no need for Wu Ming to continue staying here. With this thought in mind, Wu Ming nodded to himself and then spoke to Abent. Abent, follow the magic power left behind by Azrael and head north. Wu Ming was not prepared to meet with Artoria and the Knights of the Round Table now. The most important thing now was to find Gadatsi and hand over the Holy Grail to Chaldea. However, Abent did not know what Wu Ming was thinking, and neither did Gabriel. Gabriel only knew that she, Wu Ming, and Abent had just arrived here and were about to leave. Hey, Master, are you leaving now? Don't you want to stay a little longer? Gabriel said coquettishly. No, let's find Azrael and the others first. Hey, why are you doing this? Gabriel looked unhappy. Then, Wu Ming once again raised his fist. This caused Gabriel's unhappy face to instantly turn into a happy one. Compared to Gabriel's displeasure, Abent was much more obedient. If his master said he was leaving, then he would leave. However, Wu Ming came so ostentatiously and wanted to leave so simply. It would not be so easy. That was because Gawain had already reported to a group inn, and a group inn had already woken up the Lion King who often slept. Chapter 729. On the tallest spire in the center of the holy city, the Lion King stood alone on an open platform with the holy spear in her hand. Her eyes glowing with golden divinity, Artoria looked at the floating tree in the sky that had begun to move toward the north. Villo. Artoria muttered Wu Ming's name as she looked at the floating tree. In the holy city, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city. He had already reported to Egwene, and Egwene said that he had already awakened the king when the enemy appeared. The king also said that he would attack the third party that provoked the holy city. After that, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city after Egwene gave him a few more instructions. Gawain was determined to be the king's tool, so without Artoria's instructions, Gawain would not do anything else. What he needed to do next was to continue the holy purification and clean up the humans who were not qualified. Continue the holy purification, Knights of Solemnity in position. Following Gawain's order, the Knights of Solemnity surrounded the refugees again. The refugees' faces turned from joy to horror as they began to massacre. Ignoring the refugees' screams, Gawain turned around. None of them are qualified. Recalling what Egwene told him, Gawain shook his head. He said that it was the king who told him to immediately carry out the holy purification. Although he did not know why it was so urgent, as a tool, Gawain chose to follow the order. Seeing that most of the refugees had been killed, Gawain shook his head and entered the holy city. Looks like there aren't many people who are qualified to enter the holy city. The Knights of Solemnity would take care of the remaining traces. In the sky, in Abante's monitoring room, Wu Ming naturally saw the scene of the refugees being slaughtered, but there was nothing he could do, because Wu Ming found that Artoria had locked onto him. Although Abante could not detect the holy city, Wu Ming, who had a special connection with Artoria, could feel that he had been locked onto by the holy spear. Artoria did not allow Wu Ming to interfere with the holy purification because she wanted to prove her determination to Wu Ming. And Wu Ming was not a saint, so he would not risk being attacked by the holy spear to save the refugees. Previously, he had only done what he could to save those refugees at the gates of the holy city. The reason why he saved the refugees from Tristan's hands was also because it was within his capabilities. Of course, there was also the matter of face. Those refugees were saved by him, so if they were killed in front of Silent Wonder, then Silent Wonder would lose face. This time, however, it was different. Abante was high up in the sky, far from the ground. Furthermore, Lungo Minyad had locked onto him. This was a ceremony to prove Artoria's decision to Wu Ming. If Wu Ming messed up, Artoria wouldn't be polite. More importantly, if Wu Ming made a move, he might have a falling out with Artoria. If Silent Wonder had been summoned normally as Varen, then as a knight, he would have been influenced by the spirit base to prevent the refugees from being massacred. But it was a pity. Wu Ming added his main body's authority to this spirit base, summoning the Skywing species and Abante. This spirit base was no longer a pure British silver dragon, Vero, Cyrus said, but the dominant one was the origin dragon, Wu Ming. Even though the two of them were the same person, Abante, speed up and continue to move north, Wu Ming urged Abante. Wu Ming, who had never been to the north, could not use the portal, so he could only use Abante as a vehicle to move. Abant sped up and headed north without stopping. Wu Ming opened the portal and walked in. After walking out of the portal, Wu Ming arrived outside of Abante. Wu Ming silently looked at the tallest tower in the center of the holy city below. It was strange, as if Artoria had removed the shield. Wu Ming saw Artoria standing at the top of the tallest tower in the holy city. Artoria also raised her head and looked at Wu Ming. Neither of them spoke. Wu Ming read some of Artoria's thoughts from her eyes. Artoria's determination showed that she would save people in her own way. Even Wu Ming could not change her mind. However, Wu Ming just smiled. He did not think that the first Hassan was wrong. He would definitely come back to save Artoria, who was deeply deified. He waved his hand again, and the black and purple ripples swallowed Wu Ming. Abante, who was moving north, had also moved a large distance. He was almost out of the sky around the holy city. The two met again, and it ended abruptly. Lord Vero, my king. Guinevere was hiding behind one of the buildings on the platform where Artoria was. He was muttering Wu Ming and Artoria's names. Let's go back, Guinevere. Artoria's sudden voice startled Guinevere. Yes, yes. On the other side, Agwawan, who was in the tower of the holy city, saw the floating tree safely leave. He could not help but frown. His king promised him to destroy the enemy, and he did not keep his promise. However, even if his king did not keep his promise, he would not be dissatisfied. It was not something he should think about. Shaking his head silently, Agwawan went to welcome Artoria's return. What he needed to do was to eliminate all the enemies, and then sacrifice them all for the sake of his king's great cause. That was all. On Abante's side, Wu Ming was sitting on the sofa, thinking about the next step of his plan. Artoria had really changed. She was not the kind of person who would do things her own way. As long as someone advised her to do something, she would think about it and ask for more. However, this meeting between Wu Ming and Artoria made Wu Ming see that Artoria, as King Wu Ming, was not determined because she had become the goddess Lungaminiad. In short, she was on the wrong path. For people who were on the wrong path, what they needed was to be pulled up. According to First Hassan, saving the Lion King would not only require Wu Ming's power, but also the power of the Silver Arm. If I'm not wrong, Bedivere must be in this singularity. However, it was not easy to find someone who could move in a sea of people. It was wiser to meet up with Gadatsi and the others. At this time, Abante gave Wu Ming a hint. On the magic screen provided by Abante, Wu Ming saw a team of knights with the symbol of the holy city's Lion King. The leader was one of the knights of the Round Table that Wu Ming was familiar with. Lancelot. Chapter 730. That's right, the leading knight was a knight in purple armor, and this knight was Lancelot. What's wrong? Master, do you know that knight? Gilliel heard Wu Ming's muttering and moved her head closer. Yes, I do know him. Wu Ming nodded, but his expression was a little awkward. Lancelot was indeed a very upright person. He was recognized as the #1 knight under Artoria other than Wu Ming. As for why Wu Ming had to be excluded, it was because the other knights thought that Wu Ming was simply a monster and could not be included in the ranks of comparison. But that was not the main point. The main point was that Lancelot actually liked Guinevere. Guinevere liked Wu Ming, and compared to Guinevere, Wu Ming liked Artoria more. Artoria took the initiative to distance herself from Wu Ming because of the king for the people reason. This relationship was like a third-rate idol drama, which made Wu Ming feel quite helpless. Of course, Lancelot liked Guinevere when the timeline was correct. King Arthur's story had silence involvement, and it was very likely that a lot of changes had taken place. The story of the long march to seize the bull and the Epic of Gilgamesh also had a butterfly effect because of Wu Ming's intrusion. It was already different from the original that Wu Ming knew, but one thing was certain. Wu Ming had read the story of King Arthur in the world of the War of the 14 Knights, and also read the story of the deceased King Arthur in the world of Mayu and Ilia. In the story, Lancelot did not exactly show his love for Guinevere. What did this mean? This meant that every world was affected by Wu Ming. It turned out that although it was a parallel world, because of Wu Ming's special identity, as long as Wu Ming made an impact on history in a parallel world, there would be stories of Wu Ming in every parallel world because of Wu Ming's special identity. But this did not mean that countless Wu Ming had experienced an adventure in every parallel world. In Wu Ming's view, it was more like a copy and paste between worlds. Take, for example, the Gilgamesh that Wu Ming met was obviously the female version, but the male version was also quite familiar with Wu Ming, and Wu Ming was also very familiar with the male version of Gilgamesh, as if they had lived and experienced together. Therefore, Wu Ming wasn't unfamiliar with the male version of Gilgamesh, and Wu Ming wasn't unfamiliar to the male version of Gilgamesh either. It was as though Wu Ming was the male version of Gilgamesh's Hyunryong, but Wu Ming didn't experience it with a male version of Gilgamesh. In other words, all the Wu Ming in the parallel worlds had become one person, just like Zelik. And the story that Wu Ming participated in was no longer the story that Wu Ming knew from the beginning of the ordinary world. At the end of King Arthur's story, Guinevere was burned at the stake after Morgan Le Fay's scheme failed and revealed the fact that she loved Wu Ming. In the end, Lancelot robbed the execution ground in the name of loving Guinevere. But Guinevere had also told Wu Ming with certainty that nothing happened between her and Lancelot. Wu Ming could see that Guinevere didn't lie to him. As a reader who had read the King Arthur's legend without Vilo the Ransword, Wu Ming knew that the reason why Lancelot fell in love with Guinevere was because during the process of being Guinevere's knight, both of them gradually developed a spiritual love because of King Arthur's sigh. And Guinevere's knight became Wu Ming. So Lancelot shouldn't have fallen in love with Guinevere anymore. Therefore, Wu Ming didn't need to feel awkward. After all, nothing happened between him and Guinevere. Master, I feel that you and this guy named Lancelot don't have a good relationship. Jillian looked back and forth between Wu Ming and Lancelot on the big screen, as if she really saw some clues. Then, Jillian was warned by Wu Ming's iron fist. No matter what, let's meet Lancelot first. Seeing that Lancelot's direction wasn't the holy city, Wu Ming was curious. There were no houses to live in there, only a large mound. It was impossible for the people of the mountain to live there. So, what did Lancelot go to do? Wu Ming let Abin continue to head north. Although he was a little worried about Jillian staying in Abin's body alone, Jillian, who had been given the Vitality Incarnation, wouldn't make Wu Ming worry. Then, Wu Ming opened the portal connecting to the ground and walked in. Abin, let me see why Master went to find Lancelot. As soon as Wu Ming left, Jillian stopped covering her head and flew to the big screen excitedly. However, the big screen that was playing Lancelot suddenly turned black. Hey, why is it like this, Abbott? Jillian shouted regretfully. Then, a line of words appeared on the big screen. Hey, what's this? Jillian curiously went up. If I knew you would peep at me, I would have let Abbott cut off the image when you came over. Just wait for another bump on your head. Sigh. Jillian was stunned. Then, Jillian's sorrowful voice was heard. Hey. On the ground, in the shadow of a mound, a dark purple ripple opened and Wu Ming walked out. Was that Jillian's scream just now? Wu Ming smiled as he looked at the teleportation gate that was almost closed. She's really dishonest. Shaking his head, Wu Ming stopped thinking about Jillian. The mound that Wu Ming chose was a mound that Abin had detected that Lancelot's troops had to pass through. Presumably, Lancelot would arrive soon. Wu Ming looked at his clothes. Before that, I should change into a knight's armor. As Wu Ming spoke, magic power surged and covered Wu Ming's entire body, including his head. A few seconds later, a handsome silver-white knight wearing armor and a cloak appeared. Now, all I need to do is wait. After saying that, Wu Ming casually sat cross-legged and waited quietly. After a few minutes, Lancelot's troops, which were not moving very quickly, arrived. As Wu Ming was sitting in the shadow of the mound, ordinary knights would not be able to see him clearly from afar. However, with Lancelot's eyesight, he could naturally see him clearly. Everyone, stop advancing and rest. Lancelot's pupils suddenly shrank, and he immediately issued an order to the troops behind him. Then, he rode his horse towards Wu Ming's location. Chapter 731. The horse's speed was not fast, so Lancelot gave up halfway through the ride. Lancelot agilely jumped down from the horse and ran towards Wu Ming's direction. The black horse that was abandoned by Lancelot stopped and stayed where it was. Lancelot came to a position a few meters in front of Wu Ming. Lancelot, who was dizzy with joy, calmed down. "You?" Lancelot didn't know what to say for a moment. It was as if his voice recorder was stuck. "What? Don't you recognize me, Lancelot?" Wu Ming, who was sitting cross-legged, looked at Lancelot and took off his helmet. The helmet turned into magic power and disappeared with the wind like sand. Then, Wu Ming's face, which was rather familiar to Lancelot, appeared. "Sir Villo, it's really you?" Lancelot instantly became agitated, but immediately after, Lancelot put on a sorrowful look. "If you came a little earlier, how good would that be?" Lancelot's tone was full of helplessness. "Are you referring to the matters regarding our king?" Although the relationship between Wu Ming and Artoria was known by Guinevere, and the other Knights of the Round Table also saw some clues, but in front of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming still called Artoria our king. "Yes, Sir Villo, if you came a little earlier, maybe you could save our king." Lancelot nodded. Regarding this point, Silent Wonder admitted that he and Lancelot had the same thoughts. If he came here a little earlier, Artoria wouldn't have become like this, assimilated by the goddess. But it's not too late now. After the first Hassan reminded Wu Ming also understood that he could still save Artoria with his own strength and the silver arm. "By the way, Lancelot, you look a little different from Gao, Winching, and the others." Wu Ming looked at Lancelot meaningfully. Of course, Wu Ming was referring to Lancelot's attitude towards Artoria. The other knights were all loyal to Artoria. No matter what happened to Artoria, they would not feel sad about it. But Lancelot was very sad because of the change of the king, and this sadness burst out when he saw Wu Ming. "You're right, Sir Villo, I feel sad about it." Lancelot nodded. "Our king's current approach is not right. I want to stand on the opposite side of our king and fight our king with Guy." Lancelot said, as if he was reminiscing. "However, only you, Lord Varen, can save our king. This is what Kai, Lamarck, Gaholis, and the others who stand against our king all agree on." Lancelot closed his eyes as he spoke. Hearing Lancelot's words, Wu Ming recalled the faces of Guy and the others. Just like how Wu Ming was familiar with them, they were also familiar with Wu Ming. They believed that the Lion King could be saved by Wu Ming. "I'm a sinner. I betrayed our king, and I don't want to betray him again. So, like Gawain, I chose to stand on the side of our king and become a knight who will listen to our king." But Lancelot opened his eyes, which were filled with sadness and pain. "I don't want to see our king go down the wrong path. I don't want to see our queen cry. I don't want to see Camelot die. Don't want to see our queen cry." Hearing this, Wu Ming was a bit surprised. It seemed that Lancelot still had some yearning for Guinevere. "Guy and the others understood the pain in my heart. They understood me and entrusted the important task of finding you to me. After that, I volunteered to become a ranger knight, hoping to find you in advance." Lancelot did not believe that Wu Ming, as a knight of the Round Table, would not be summoned. Lancelot believed that, just like Galahad and Bedivere, Wu Ming must have been summoned to another place in this area because of some unforeseen circumstances. Heaven did not disappoint the faithful. Lancelot, finally found Wu Ming today. "I finally found you, Sir Villo." Lancelot looked at Wu Ming with hope and excitement. However, Wu Ming did not care much about Lancelot's excitement. "I say, Lancelot, it must not feel good to kill a friend." Wu Ming turned his head to the distance and looked at the scenery in the distance. Lancelot was silent. How could it feel good? Whether it was Tristan, Gawain, Mordred, or Lancelot, although they were all on the king's side, the matter of killing a comrade was still a knot in their hearts. Even the most cold-hearted and seemingly most loyal to the king, a gull, who was not important to the king, had a slight fluctuation in his heart. After all, they were comrades who had fought together for more than a decade. Even if he knew that they had all become heroic spirits and descended in the form of servants, how could he just kill them? The pain and sin of killing a comrade with his own hands would not disappear. Presumably, Guy and the others also thought the same. Not only did they have to brandish their swords at their own compatriots, but they also had to attack the king they were loyal to. How much condemnation did they have to make such a decision? Seeing that Lancelot did not say anything, Wooming spoke. "I have been to the holy city and met the king and queen. Gawain also told me about you." Lancelot was stunned. Then his eyes became gloomy. With Gawain's personality, he must have told Wooming everything. "The villain must be very disappointed in us. Not only did we not stop the king, but we also killed our own." The thing that left the deepest impression on me was that Gawain told me about Gareth. Lancelot's expression became even gloomier. Whether it was the accidental killing of Gareth in his previous life or the guilt of not being able to kill Gareth in this life, Lancelot's heart was painful. That child is still as innocent as ever, just like Galahad. Wooming said with nostalgia. Wooming did not have the slightest sadness or anger, as if he was talking about an ordinary matter. "Don't stand, sit down and talk," Wooming said to Lancelot with a smile. Lancelot was puzzled by Wooming's emotions. Why was he always so calm? But in the end, Lancelot sat down beside Wooming. Every knight of the Round Table is a good person. Guy and the others chose to stand against Artoria, and you chose to be completely loyal to Artoria. Wooming did not add the honorific ching, nor did he address Artoria as queen. The tone of his communication with Lancelot also changed from colleague to friend. Whether it is you or them, you all acted for your own beliefs. I don't think there is anything to be sad about. Chapter 732. Lancelot listened quietly and did not interrupt. In order to prevent Artoria from going astray, they stood against her. In order to make up for the mistakes of your past life, you stood on Artoria's side. Even if you betrayed the king you served, even if you killed your own people, it was a choice you made based on your own beliefs, and you worked hard to live for it. Wooming paused for a moment, then looked at Lancelot. This result may be sad in the eyes of others, but in my opinion, as a knight of the Round Table, this is not something to be sad about. Lord Villo, Lancelot looked at Wooming blankly. Take Gareth, for example. She believed that the king was right, and she thought the same when she left. However, her pure spirit, which was not weaker than Galahad's, could not bear the inner condemnation of killing her own people, so she chose a suitable time to voluntarily leave. In my opinion, Gareth did a good job. Take you, for example. In order to find me, you endured the pain of killing your own people. Take Artoria, for example. She proved her will to me, and I witnessed Artoria's proof. For this, a group of refugees died in front of me. This sentence shocked Lancelot. As someone who knew Wooming well, he knew that Wooming would not be stingy to help those who could be saved. Then, Wooming's eyes became firm. However, if I had to do it again, I would still choose to stand by and do nothing. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and there was no such thing as a free lunch. There was no such thing as a free lunch. In order to stop Artoria, Guy and the others were filled with condemnation. In order to protect Artoria, Lancelot and the others were stained with the blood of their own people. In order to protect humans, Artoria chose to turn them into specimens and bear the pain of others' incomprehension. In order to be loyal to Artoria, Gareth chose to be stained with the blood of his own people and had a nervous breakdown. In order to bear witness to Artoria's decision, Wooming did not save them, which went against his usual style. The price was light, and the result was the same. There is no need to be sad about the past. Even if this sadness was caused by us, no matter what, this is the choice of the Knights of the Round Table. All we need to do is to look forward. Wuming wouldn't be immersed in the past. This was his way of survival as the origin dragon. This was also why Wuming's heart hadn't aged and was forever filled with the vigor of a youth. Because his heart was looking forward. Lancelot fell into silence. Wuming was right. It was because of his hesitation, because he was immersed in the guilt of betraying his king in the past, that he decided to be completely loyal to Artoria in this life. It was because Gawain felt guilty that his dissatisfaction with Lancelot had led to the Battle of Camlan, which ultimately led to the fall of Arthur's dynasty. That was why Gawain chose to be completely loyal to Artoria and become a tool without thinking. Tristan had hurt Artoria because of his words when she was alive. In order to make up for it, he also decided to be completely loyal to Artoria. It was the same for everyone. Because they wanted to make up for something, they chose to stand in their original position and wanted to do better. If we all let go of the past, will we be able to pull our king back from the wrong path? Lancelot said, thoughtfully. However, they had already come this far. Just like Wuming said, they shouldn't be immersed in the past. They had to look forward. In short, I have found a way to save Artoria. Don't worry, leave it to me, Lancelot. Wuming said with a smile and extended his hand to Lancelot. Lancelot was stunned, then shook Wuming's hand. Yes, I'm counting on you, Lord Vero. This was a promise between friends. Lancelot chose to believe in Wuming. Then, Lord Villo, what do you want to do next? Do you need to go to my camp to prepare? Lancelot stood up and asked respectfully. Now that the conversation between friends had ended, Lancelot also added a respectful title to Wuming. You have a camp outside the Holy City? Wuming was stunned. Was Lancelot not going to return to the Holy City to stay? Because I was anxious to find you. I have applied to stay outside for a long time. My king also agreed to my application, so I have my own camp, Lancelot explained. Since you have a camp, then let's go take a look. So, Wuming joined Lancelot's team and set off together. In Abani's body, Giliel had stopped Abani's actions. Abani had brought her to the sky above the northern mountains. Next, she needed Wuming's instructions. So slow, master, Giliel said in boredom as she rolled around in the air. However, at this moment, Wuming was already on the way to Lancelot's camp. Wuming rode a magically created horse and walked side by side with Lancelot at the front of the team. By the way, Mordred is also a gorilla knight, right? Does she also have her own camp outside the Holy City? Wuming asked curiously. No, Mordred's words are a little special. Lancelot's expression became subtle when talking about Mordred. My king did not prepare a residence for Mordred in the Holy City, but Mordred should not have a residence outside. Due to Mordred's personality, she did not have a fixed residence. Moreover, she did not bring many knights with her. It could be said that compared to Lancelot, Mordred was a true gorilla knight. As expected of her, Wuming's mouth twitched slightly. By the way, does Lord Villo know about Chaldea? Lancelot suddenly asked. Oh, are you talking about the last master? Wuming had a smile on his face. As expected, you know about the existence of Chaldea. Lancelot nodded and began his explanation. Yesterday, the master of Chaldea and the mountain folk in the north fled to the northern mountains with a group of St. Bard refugees. I happened to be nearby and was ordered to pursue them by agronomy. Gorilla Knights seemed to be a noble title, but in fact they were scouts and vanguards. To put it bluntly, if something happened, they would be the first to go up to the Holy City. The reason why Tristan was often sent out by agronomy was because of the instability of the Gorilla Knights. After all, if you were here today, you might be there tomorrow. You really pursued them? Wuming looked at Lancelot with a strange and subtle expression. After all, Matthew, who was possessed by Galahad, was among them. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.